They are monsters, and their main goal is to create chaos in society and destroy civilization. He is the same villain as they are. He has the same goal, but unfortunately, now it is unattainable, and now you will find out why. Kevin watched with hatred as his classmates laughed and discussed something interesting. For them, it was a normal school day. Pathetic people. He hated them, yet he had the power to destroy them all with one snap of his fingers. They had no right to life. The main character was covered in splashes of the blood of his classmates. But just before death, they were happy and laughing. Now their bodies are cooling down. Kevin was looking for someone who controls time. They were just a hindrance that he could not deal with. They called out to him at the wrong time. Time rewinded back again. Everyone was safe and sound again. What a shame. A classmate rudely asked why he was just staring at her. But Kevin had no interest in communicating with her. He turned his head away without saying a word. The girl couldn't calm down and teased him that he might be interested in her. He hated everyone, hated her. Now even killing this girl is disgusting. Tom, Kevin's classmate, ran into the classroom and suggested they go to the store. But Tom was not interested in his proposal. Kevin raised his finger up. The girl inserted herself into the conversation, accusing Kevin of staring at everyone like a pervert, and now pretending to be suffering. And besides, he doesn't consider himself Tom's friend. Tom laughed and said that men's friendships are not built in one day. A volcano of emotions was seething inside Kevin, which was ready to explode at any moment with one movement of his finger. He threw his pens at the heads of his classmates with great speed. He couldn't stand it, turned to his classmates, and declared that he was no friend to them, that he didn't play their stupid games, but no one heard him anymore. And once again, an attempted murder. Again, these bloody bodies on the classroom floor. Kevin again felt that it had started again. It happens all the time and the feelings are painfully familiar. In his eyes, the faces of his classmates have lost color. Everything around him begins to lose color. Time began to go backwards. Second by second, everything was exactly as it was, but in reverse. It was like rewinding an old movie. Gradually, Kevin returned a few minutes ago. Tom ran into the classroom, just like a couple of minutes ago, and suggested we go to the store. A harmful classmate said the same words about a pervert. Kevin walked out of the classroom. He couldn't stay here any longer. It was crazy. He has powerful energy and superpowers, but he can't do anything with it. Someone unknown rewinded time back to when Kevin killed the man. To get rid of this time loop, you need to get rid of the stranger. We must find and kill him. This is the only way out. Having killed another classmate, Kevin was again and again disappointed in the mistake and wrong choice. He walked along the corridors of the school and tried to figure out where to look for that unknown person. Killing everyone one by one, he will finally get to the culprit. Kevin heard voices from the boys' bathroom and headed there. 2 high school students pressed the student because he did not comply with their request. He did not buy the cigarettes that the boys sent him to buy. One kicked the student in the chest and said that tomorrow he must bring money for this. The boy begged, asked to let him go. He would not be able to get that amount. A series of brutal blows fell on the poor schoolboy. Kevin went into the toilet and carefully began to observe what was happening. One of the high school students shouted at him to get out and stop staring. But Kevin was not going to obey the bully and continue to watch. The high school student furiously punched Kevin in the back of the head, causing him to hit the tiled wall of the toilet. He shouldn't have done it very wrongly. Enraged, Kevin turned to the high school student in a split second and extended his hand to him. He felt a sharp, unbearable pain throughout his body and could not move. Kevin's energy increased with each passing second. In front of his peer, the high school student, bleeding, collapsed helplessly on the floor of the toilet. Choking on his own blood, he grunted some more and then fell silent. His body did not move. The schoolboy looked at Kevin. His gaze expressed hopelessness, but he thanked the savior. Kevin's gaze was like a monster. He looked at the frightened boy. He was next. The schoolboy did not believe what he heard. He backed away in fear, but it was too late. Kevin extended his hand in his direction, and the poor fellow suffered the same fate as the high school student. The entire floor of the toilet was covered in the blood of innocent schoolchildren who had suffered at the hands of Kevin. But there was still a third, a friend of the murdered high school student. He also cannot be left alive. Kevin was not stopped by the pleading look of the victim. He did not care about the tears of the beggar, and he extended his hand to him. And everything happened again, like again. Time began to spin back again. Again, the same moment when he just entered the boys' toilet and saw the high school students. Again, the same moment when one of them dealt Kevin a crushing blow to the head against the wall. The damn time loop did not leave him and pursued him again and again. But this time, Kevin did nothing to make the time loop take over him. He endured the pressure of the high school student. Kevin did not fight back even when the bully struck him in the face again. He endured blow after blow, because eventually it had to end. Suddenly, Tom burst into the toilet and immediately rushed to defend Kevin, attacking the high school student. He, not expecting a sudden attack, collapsed on the floor, not having time to understand anything and defend himself. Both high school students and the schoolboy were in a stupor, and it seemed no one else was going to sort things out and continue the fight. Tom sat down next to Kevin to inspect his abrasions and make sure he was okay. Kevin's lip was split. There were abrasions and bruises on his cheek. He appeared to be slightly injured. Tom looked at his friend. Kevin needed help, and Tom suggested going to the first aid station. He annoyed Kevin. He still won't leave him alone, friend. No, he doesn't need friends. The restless Tom did not lag behind Kevin. He could not leave his friend in such a state and insisted that he needed to see a doctor. He, despite Kevin's objections, took him, put him on his back, and headed out. At some point, Kevin thought that maybe he needed to be gentler with Tom, but he should not hesitate. The villain is not familiar with such traits as mercy and compassion. The intercom rang, and the girl, who had previously been doing her household chores, went to find out who was behind the door. An unfamiliar male voice introduced himself as a neighbor downstairs, and said that an incomprehensible noise was coming from her apartment. Not expecting any trouble from her neighbor, the girl calmly opened the door to the stranger. This act became her fatal mistake. It was Kevin, and he had his own intentions. Everyone he killed was different people. Neighbors on the landing, residents of the house, peers from his school, but everything was useless. At first, Kevin tried to experiment with time. The first was a rollback of time with the possibility of repetition. He opened the timer on his phone and noted the start time of the experiment. Kevin chose the first victim. It was Tom, sitting on the last desk. He was killed instantly, without beatings or blood, just a cardiac arrest during a lesson. Kevin looked at the timer to time Tom's murder, counted and realized that the murder had happened a minute earlier, while Tom was still alive. He again timed the start of the experiment to find out what would happen after the repetition. Kevin calmly repeated the experiment on a classmate. Tom was dead again, the same cardiac arrest. He looked again at the time of the kill. The time after the rollback was already 2 minutes. This means that, according to the timer, death occurs before the killing begins. And if you constantly activate the time rollback, you can roll back in time indefinitely. Kevin looked at his classmate Kurt Smith, sitting at the same desk with him, and continued the experiment. Now he repeated the murder several times, and the result was stunning. Kevin successfully activated the rollback 5 times in a row, and time rolled back 8 minutes. Suddenly he felt something wet and warm under his nose. It was his blood. Then Tom saw him, and jumping up from his seat with concern, shouted that Kevin was bleeding. Kevin is so tired of him. How long can he tolerate this clingy guy? Kevin concluded that successive time rollbacks are possible, but more than 5 times in a row are bad for his health. This was followed by a second experiment. Suicide, not murder, but suicide. Kevin wanted to know if time would roll back if he committed suicide. There were people below. How they would react to his death is very interesting. But what if time doesn't roll back? Such a death will be very stupid and insignificant. The experiment began and Kevin flew down at high speed. One of the passers-by saw a man fall from the roof and rushed to his aid. Again this Tom, what a talent he has for appearing where he is not asked. Kevin lay motionless on the ground, which terrified Tom, who was walking nearby with his dog. Waking up a moment later, Kevin opened one eye and raised his head to look at Tom. This unhealthy concern has already completely begun to piss Kevin off. He reasoned why he couldn't control his powers. Perhaps he was afraid to die. Kevin tapped Tom on the back and asked him to stop. Tom, although he let Kevin go, continued to insist that he needed to go to the first aid station. Kevin looked at Tom from under his brows and through clenched teeth said to get out of sight and leave him alone. And at the same instant, Kevin suddenly jumped out onto the roadway and threw himself under the wheels of the truck. This time he was not afraid of death and the experiment was a success. Suicide also activates a rollback of time. And time really rolled back. Kevin was again sitting on the back of Tom, who was rushing as fast as he could to the first aid station. Meanwhile, within the school walls, another group of high school students continued to mock the student. Having found somewhere a rubber head of either a horse or a donkey, they put it on the head of a pier and continued to laugh. Tom ran towards them at full speed with Kevin behind him. The first aid station was already close. Fred Walker, who was knocked down by Tom, asked classmate Ethan Hall who these impudent schoolchildren were who were running towards the first aid station. Ethan replied that the one behind him was Kevin Morgan, but he didn't know what class he was in. Then he added that the second one is that the big guy can easily fight back. Ethan removed the rubber head from the schoolboy and gave him 5 minutes to find these insolent people. The schoolboy ran towards the first aid station and was glad that this time he got off easily from the bullying of the high school students. Tom was once again unlucky he failed to reach the first aid station. Kevin was angry. After all, he asked to let him go in an amicable way, but this annoying idiot didn't understand. He looked at the slightly open door of the first aid station, which was located a couple of meters away from him, and headed there. It seems he hasn't tried to kill the nurse yet. The schoolboy stood in front of Tom's lifeless body and did not know what to do and where to look for the second one. The door to the first aid post was ajar. It was quiet there, and the student looked into the office, calling for the nurse. On the floor of the infirmary lay the bloody body of a nurse, and Kevin stood above her and looked at her indifferently. Then he looked up and saw a schoolboy with horror on his face. Kevin took a step towards the teenager, and here was the next victim. Time jumped back again, but for Kevin, the schoolboy stood in the middle of the corridor and did not understand how he could end up here again. He clearly remembered that Kevin had attacked him and struck him to death. And now he's back on his knees in front of a group of high school students, and Ethan screams after Tom runs away with Kevin behind him. And now he is forced to find those guys who ran past. All this happened literally a few minutes ago. How is this possible? There was no doubt that something like this had happened before. In order not to waste time and not to kill again those whom he checked, Kevin kept a notebook, gradually crossing out the students of the school. But the notebook ran out. Most of the school children were killed, and it was necessary to expand the circle of search for that stranger who ruled over time. Kevin closed his notebook and headed to the school in the neighboring area. There was silence in the school classrooms. Lessons were going on, and the school children sitting at their desks could not know the future and their fate. And then the teacher's story was disrupted by sound, which in no way fit with the school atmosphere. An unfamiliar teenager stood at the door of the classroom looking at a notebook. Just like I'm now looking at the list of those who watched the video. Do not subscribe to the YouTube channel, and do not comment on the video. Guys, this is very important to me. Help me make my dream come true. 5,000 subscribers. Don't forget to like. Have a nice day. You are the best. One of the students recognized Kevin, stood up from his desk, and asked what he was doing at someone else's school. Kevin slowly took his eyes off his notebook, looked around the whole class, and smiled. Hi all. In front of the surprised students, he walked into the classroom and stood between the rows of school desks. In an instant, pens, pencils, felt-tip pens, rulers, stationery knives, everything simultaneously rose from the tables and hovered in the air. The teacher with an angry look began to shout at Kevin. How could he enter the class without permission and create such a disgrace, who he even was? Kevin, standing in the middle of the class, languidly said that he was the master of the ability to rewind time. The teacher decided that the troublemaker was mocking him if he took such liberty, and ordered him to immediately leave the class. The teacher's screams and threats tired Kevin a little. It was time to end it. And then all the objects hanging in the air instantly changed direction and flew at breakneck speed in the direction of the teacher. There was panic in the class. The poor students screamed and tried to leave the room in fear. But Kevin's energy is enough for everyone. There are enough sharp objects for everyone. No one will leave the school alive. That's what Kevin planned, and so it will be. Everyone will die. The time rewind was successful again. Controlling his own powers, it was no longer difficult for Kevin. The teenager was sitting in the school cafeteria, reluctantly picking at a cold dish and could not understand what had happened to him recently. It was déjà vu. A crowd of those high school students who had recently mocked him in the school hallway approached him. Ethan Hall, a fat high school student, affectionately, with pretense, asked why he wasn't eating anything and offered to dine with them at the same table from now on. Dylan, that was the name of the schoolboy, thought that he had probably passed some kind of test, and they would take him to their team, and timidly, but happily, agreed. But then he felt Ethan's hand on the back of his head, and his face was in a plate of food. Ethan then grabbed Dylan by the hair and pulled his head back, Dylan groaning in pain. The high school student recalled that he was still waiting for the teenager to find and bring to him at least the big guy running down the corridor. Turning to the sixth graders, Ethan asked if they didn't think it was Dylan who killed the guy, because the guy committed suicide. Then he turned to Dylan and asked why he was standing over the corpse of a guy who killed himself. The schoolboy quietly said that he felt sorry for the poor fellow, and was afraid that Ethan had noticed something unusual in Dylan's behavior. The group of high school students left the cafeteria, leaving Dylan sitting in thought. Later he left and headed to the neighboring school building. She really wanted the guys to take him with them, but Ethan refused. And suddenly he saw something small on the grass. Away from the sidewalk, Dylan decided to come closer. It was a bird. It looked like it was dead, lying motionless. He remembered that poor guy who jumped off the roof of the school and committed suicide. Dylan wanted to approach the poor guy because he could definitely help him. The schoolboy could revive him, not for the first time. But no matter how many times he did this, time constantly rolled back to the moment of his death. Dylan, having such an ability, still considered it worthless, completely unnecessary to him. He took the poor bird in his arms and concentrated on his feelings. And suddenly she perked up and perked up. The bird was saved. Dylan let her go, looked at the sky, and thought that he wants to save people. Just like this bird. After classes, a group of high school students were hanging out idle in the backyard of the school and were waiting for Dylan. He managed to cunningly bring the big guy to them. They didn't have to wait long. Soon, Dylan and the big guy who knocked Ethan and his friend off their feet in the school hallway appeared. Tom immediately, without talking, received a powerful blow from Ethan. And only then did he hear an explanation. Ethan asked with a grin if Tom knew who he knocked down at school. Tom tried to justify himself. His friend was wounded. They were rushing to the first aid station, and it was not Tom's fault that Ethan was on his way. Ethan burst out laughing. How Tom protects his friend, just like doves. Tom menacingly said that Kevin is his friend, and he will never leave him in trouble. An idiotic smile appeared on Ethan's face, and he asked if Tom thought Kevin would thank him for this. And then Ethan, who could not have expected it, was hit by Tom's powerful blow. The fat man fell backwards and collapsed on the ground. Tom leaned over Ethan and sternly told him not to interfere with them again, otherwise the fat man would get it again. Dylan, taking advantage of the confusion, managed to sneak out of the backyard of the school and escape from the crowd of high school students. Kevin looked at his notebook. He had already killed all the first years. Now it was the turn of the second years. Dylan sat in art class and tried to listen carefully to the teacher. The teacher gave the children the task of drawing their inner world, how they feel in this life. Dylan's drawing interested the teacher. It was an unusual vision of how Dylan drew his inner world. Kevin stood outside the second year's office. Just a moment later, and he would enter the classroom to continue his murders. He always acted according to one scenario. He killed silently and in cold blood, not sparing anyone. In Dylan's class, the teacher looked at his drawing and tried to figure out the hidden meaning of what Dylan drew. Seeing which fragment of the drawing interested the teacher, Dylan explained that this was the fear of his death. The teacher praised Dylan for his unusual drawing and dual outlook. And suddenly, Dylan's mind became clouded, and he clearly saw the corridor in the second-year office, near which Kevin was standing. He again experienced that inexplicable and incomprehensible feeling, but this time it was closer, much closer than last time. He saw Kevin's look, a look full of anger, hatred, and the desire to kill. The art teacher turned around and saw a teenager standing in the doorway of the classroom. Sharp objects hung in the air again, and the teacher tried to protect the children and kick Kevin out of the classroom. Dylan tried to stop the teacher, saying that getting close to Kevin was dangerous and could cost her life. The school children's interest was greater than their fear, and they crowded around Kevin, not thinking about the dangerous consequences. Blood and dead bodies were everywhere. Dylan could not move from his place from fear. And only now the students, sensing real danger, rushed to the exit. But the door did not budge. It was definitely blocked from that side. No efforts made were crowned with success. The dying art teacher lay in a pool of blood on the floor. She let out a final groan and fell silent. Dylan bent over her in tears. At all costs, he wanted to help the teacher. He wanted to revive her. He could. His strength was enough to make the teacher come to life. Kevin momentarily turned his attention from the students to Dylan, who was bowing before the teacher. A crowd of frightened school children felt the hopelessness of the situation and also looked at their classmates sitting in front of the dead teacher. Dylan bent over the lifeless body of the teacher, placed his palms on her, and was illuminated by a bright pink light. At that moment, a miracle happened. The teacher took a breath, woke up, and put her hand to her head. She was in great pain. Kevin approached Dylan, who was on his knees, and with an angry expression, gathered all his strength into his fist. Dylan felt Kevin's full power and pulled back, but it was too late. He saw Kevin's glowing hand, felt it touch him, and heard Kevin scream, "Die, master of the ability." Dylan was shocked by Kevin's words. He is the master of abilities just like him, but why does Kevin kill people? Dylan wanted and saved the teacher, but why? Is there any point in this? Kevin continues to kill anyway, which means Dylan will suffer as before. Thoughts raced through his head at breakneck speed. If he left everything as it was, there wouldn't be the slightest chance, which meant he needed to roll back time so it wouldn't be too late. Dylan needed to make an urgent decision. After all, Kevin would, sooner or later, kill the teacher again. Then he saw how Kevin, with incredible strength, lifted a fragment of the concrete floor and held it in the air, intending to throw it at Dylan. He instantly made the right decision. Now is not the right moment to roll back time. And at that moment, a sharp stone fragment flew towards Dylan at breakneck speed. But then the incredible happened. The fragment began to slow down and stopped in the air a centimeter from Dylan's face. Time stopped, the sounds around disappeared. Everything around froze, as if the film had been stopped. But how is this possible? Dylan has not yet had time to use his superpower. The most amazing thing was that not only everything around him stopped, his classmates, Kevin with his throw, Dylan himself could not move. The next moment, Dylan was sitting at his desk in art class and heard the teacher's voice from somewhere. He woke up in a cold sweat and jumped up from his seat. A second later, remembering what had just happened, he realized that time had rolled back. Dylan sighed with relief. But why has time rolled back so far? Because time should return to the moment before death. Meanwhile, Kevin was standing on the school landing and couldn't understand what was happening to him. He had never felt so lousy. Cold sweat ran down his body and his hands were shaking. This time he didn't kill anyone, and there was a very unusual time rollback. Something went wrong. Time returned him to the moment when the lesson had just begun. Kevin stood and tried to remember everything that happened down to the smallest detail. Perhaps something happened in the classroom. He decided that there was only one way to find out everything. To kill them all. There was no other choice. The art teacher, like last time, invited the students to draw their inner world. The situation repeated itself. But Dylan couldn't think about the lesson. He would soon come and kill all the students and the teacher. He felt the approach of Kevin, who was already going up to the floor where the drawing class was located. He urgently needed to come up with something. Dylan raised his hand, and lying to the teacher that he had a stomach ache, asked permission to leave the class. Peeking out of the classroom, he rushed down the hallway. Dylan was glad that Kevin had not yet reached the classroom. He hid around the corner and waited, peering into the empty corridor. Kevin could appear any minute. And then Kevin appeared. He was already near the drawing room and entered the class. Dylan rushed away. Before it's too late, he needs to be in time and save everyone. He ran to the fire panel and pressed the alarm button, signaling the evacuation of students. The students left the classrooms and headed up the stairs to the exit. Kevin watched the evacuating school children and understood that it was not just that. Someone wanted to stop him. Dylan understood that Kevin definitely had something to do with the time rollback, and this situation might stop him. But not for long. Kevin turned around and headed in the other direction. There were still plenty of opportunities to kill. The class leader, Amelia, continued to scold Tom for his recent action. Tom himself was no longer happy that he hid Ethan in the backyard of the school. Classmates who overheard their conversation began to assume that Tom and Amelia were dating. Otherwise, why would she be so worried about him being scolded for fighting? Classmates went out into the schoolyard. Amelia took a cola from the machine, and they continued the conversation. Amelia asked if Tom was afraid that Ethan would come back for him again. In vain, he defended Kevin. All the problems were because of him. She looked at Tom in surprise when he assured his friend that Kevin was a good guy and that he had once saved one of his things. Tom reminded Amelia about the abandoned hospital, which was rumored to be haunted. While still in elementary school, he and his friends plucked up courage and decided to go there. They decided to go into the hospital and take pictures of the building inside. The hospital hall had a gloomy appearance. It was scary, and the guys decided not to go far and take pictures on the first floor. The friends stood together and made cheerful faces. The photographs should have turned out cool. But suddenly Tom saw something behind the guys and was dumbfounded. All the furniture hung in the air, and a ghost hovered in the middle of the hall. Throwing away the video camera, the children rushed out of the hospital. But Tom returned. After all, Mom could have gone furious when she learned that he had lost his camera. There was no camera anywhere, and there was blood all over the hall floor. It flowed down the steps leading to the second floor. Tom knew his mother's character very well, and he had no choice but to go upstairs. Traces of blood led him to a hospital room at the end of the corridor. A boy stood in front of Tom and held his camera. It was Kevin. There was blood all over his clothes. He gave Tom the camera and walked down the dark corridor, telling him not to come back here again. Amelia was amazed by the story and asked if that hospital was still standing in its place. Tom replied that it was quite possible, and besides, he returned there a couple of days after meeting Kevin. Amelia, without finishing listening to the story, heard footsteps from behind and turned around. It was Ethan. Kevin stood on the roof of the school, and in the air, and flipping through the pages of his notebook, thought, the alarm might be the work of a time manipulator. The notebook sheets flew to shreds, a rollback that Kevin did not remember, and also this alarm. All this could not be a mere coincidence. And then the door leading to the roof opened, and Tom appeared. He brought Ethan's friends with him. Kevin managed to hide and heard one of them telling someone on the phone that they were already on the roof. One of the school children began to insult Tom, attack and provoke a fight. Tom didn't want to fight with guys younger than himself, and tried with all his might to restrain himself. Who knows how events would have unfolded further, but Ethan appeared on the roof. He said that he had not forgotten the blow he received in the school corridor, and was ready to return the favor. A direct blow to the jaw followed. Ethan chuckled and said that he was generous with thanks. The next blow hit Tom in the chest. Ethan kicked the third blow in the stomach. He smiled and slyly said that he knew that Tom had a girlfriend, and he really wanted to see her. To protect Amelia, Tom shouted that she was not his girlfriend, and that she should not be involved in their relationship. Ethan took a fighting stance and said that he was challenging him to a duel. If Tom wins, then Ethan will leave him behind. Before Tom could answer, he received a strong blow to the back with a bat. Kevin slowly walked around the corner and stood in front of the group of teenagers. He made a quick movement of his hand towards the guys. Tom felt a sharp pain in his heart and saw blood on his school uniform. And again, time rebound. Time jumped back to exactly the moment when Ethan proposed a duel to Tom. The bat hit Tom in the back again. Tom stood up and told Ethan that not only would he not fight, but he would not dodge blows either. Ethan was disappointed, saying that fighting without retaliating was boring and suggested playing a game. Rules: if Tom dodges the blows 10 times, then he wins and Ethan will leave him behind. Blow after blow followed. Tom managed to dodge. And so Ethan swung again. Tom's fist flew towards him. Ethan felt severe pain. It was Tom's blow. His hand became swollen, and he, gritting his teeth in pain, walked towards the exit. Tom collapsed on the floor and sighed with relief. This time it was all over. Then someone's shadow fell on his face. It was Kevin. Dylan walked home from school and tried to understand how it happened that two-time loops formed. The first was when Kevin attacked Dylan, and the second was when time stood still in art class. Kevin killed people, and Dylan brought them back to life. At the moment when Dylan resurrected people, time rolled back, which means Kevin is a killer. Dylan heard someone talking. It was a group of drinking teenagers sitting on a bench nearby. They asked the teenagers for a smoke. He hurried to pass by unnoticed. Dylan did not want to be involved in another story. After school, Dylan worked part-time as a cleaner in a computer club. He and his grandmother did not have enough money. Here he can calmly reflect on the situation. Time rolls back to the moment he kills someone. Maybe he likes it. Or vice versa, he does not do it for fun. Dylan remembered Kevin's face and his words. Die, manipulator. So he's looking for someone who controls the time loops. That's why Kevin kills everyone and thinks the time manipulator is Dylan. He only hoped that Kevin didn't remember him. Kevin stood and silently looked at the lying Tom. Tom stood up and worriedly asked why Kevin didn't go home and if he was okay. Kevin abruptly grabbed Tom by the jacket. He was irritating him more and more. He asked with urgency in his voice why Tom cared so much about him, even on the verge of death. He said assertively that Kevin is his friend, and he will protect his friend no matter what the cost. These words angered Kevin even more. He never considered Tom his friend, and began to demand that he tell the truth, who he really is. Tom looked at Kevin and suddenly asked if it was true that he continued to kill pigeons. That day, when Tom returned to the abandoned hospital for the second time, he saw something. There was blood and pigeon feathers everywhere. Kevin was sitting on the floor in bloody clothes. If this is so, Tom will not tell anyone about it because Kevin is his savior. Kevin brushed him off and said he didn't kill pigeons anymore. Now he kills people. Tom didn't believe what Kevin was saying. Maybe it was a joke. Kevin headed for the exit, but added that something would happen at school tomorrow, and it was better for Tom not to come, if he wants to live. As the day drew to a close, the old woman looked at the boxes collected around the area. There weren't enough to buy food. The company was still sitting in the park and drinking. The old lady saw some more abandoned boxes and came up to pick them up. One of the hooligans saw this and rudely decided to drive the old woman away, hurling insults at her. But she continued to put boxes into her cart. The guy got angry and kicked her cart. Boxes scattered on the ground. The company burst into laughter. This only egged the bully on. He took out a lighter and brought it to a piece of cardboard. The old woman begged not to do this because she had been collecting them all day. But it was too late. The boxes burst into flames in an instant, raising a bright flame of fire in the yard. Dylan left the computer club and headed home. He received his salary and thought about what to buy from food so that he would have enough to pay for them. And then he saw a fire in the yard of his house and a crying grandmother. All the work was in vain. The cardboard boxes burned, leaving a small pile of ash and ash. To protect her grandson from bullies, she told him to go home and not get involved. One of them grabbed Dylan and invited him to join in their fun. The old woman begged not to touch her grandson and extended her hands to the bully. The guy kicked the grandmother with such force that she could not stay on her feet and fell to the ground. Dylan sat down next to his grandmother and asked why they were doing this. It was cruel. And a stream of sticky alcoholic cocktail immediately poured onto his head. A blow followed. An empty can flew towards Dylan's head. A punch to the stomach caused a sharp and unbearable pain. Dylan fell, and before he closed his eyes, he saw his grandmother crying. Kevin walked into the room. His pregnant mother and his stepfather were talking while sitting on the sofa. They didn't seem to care about Kevin at all. Dylan came to his senses and helped the tearful grandmother get up. He looked into her eyes and regretted what happened. A man was walking along a dark street. He was telling someone on the phone that he would be there soon and that he had a gift. Suddenly, he felt a strong push on his shoulder. His phone almost fell out of his hands. The man called out to the guys and said that they should apologize. One of the guys grabbed the man by the jacket and threw him aside. Then he grabbed him by the hair and was ready to deliver an indestructible blow with his fist. Suddenly, a stranger appeared in front of him, grabbed the bully by the hand, and prevented the attack. The guy used obscene language and advised the stranger not to interfere and to go his own way. The stranger said they should have apologized to the passerby and didn't seem to have any intention of leaving. The enraged hooligan kicked him in the stomach, causing the stranger to fall to the ground. The teenager squatted down and wanted to take off his hood. He was interested to know who this daredevil was. The stranger immediately grabbed the bully's hand and did not allow him to do this. The teenager winced from the pain caused by the tight grip. The stranger was illuminated by a bright light. The bully's body went limp. He fell to the ground and lost consciousness, foam coming out of his mouth. The second hooligan ran up screaming and tore off the stranger's hood. It was Dylan, and the teenager, recognizing him, mockingly inquired about his grandmother's health. A fight broke out between them. At some point, Dylan managed to grab the bully by the arm, and he used his strength. Dylan hesitated. He could have killed the teenager easily and quickly for the sake of revenge for his grandmother. After all, after meeting with the hooligans, the grandmother experienced nervous stress and went to bed. Dylan felt guilty about this. He should have immediately told his mother that his grandmother was being bullied. But it was unlikely that she could help in any way, sitting in a wheelchair. That's when he decided that he needed to act. He couldn't tolerate this anymore. And now the last hooligan, fearing the consequences, quickly walked away from Dylan into a dark alley. The injured passerby, who had been watching on the sidelines all this time, thanked Dylan and also disappeared at the end of the street. There was a lesson on fire safety in the class. A fire department employee clearly demonstrated to students how to use a fire extinguisher. Tom did not listen to the lesson at all. He was alarmed by the words of his absent friend that something unusual would happen at school today. Kevin was floating in the air above the school. He really decided to carry out what he had in mind. Around him, heavy containers from a country factory swayed smoothly in the air. It was not difficult for him to move them and place them above the school. Dylan arrived at the school in time and looked up at the sky in horror. Several containers hung above the gym, where most of the students were now, and an imperturbable Kevin stood on them. He didn't think anymore. Who is the time manipulator, and who is an ordinary person? These containers are enough to kill everyone. Kevin waved his hand and the containers flew down with speed. As Dylan watched, they all fell upon the school at once, glass and piles of concrete flying. Tom, Amelia, and the rest of the school children rushed to flee, hoping for survival. A huge concrete block was rapidly approaching Dylan. Another moment and he will be crushed to death. Dylan immediately extended his hands forward and touched the approaching boulder. He tensed and used all his strength to avoid being buried under its rubble. A huge boulder fell with a roar a couple of meters from Dylan. He rushed upward to stop Kevin. Kevin turned and said that he had finally found him, the time manipulator. Dylan exclaimed, had Kevin really killed before and was doing it now just to find him? A huge boulder overtook Tom and firmly crushed him to the ground. Dylan screamed that he was not the one Kevin was looking for. An enraged Kevin extended his hand towards Dylan and said that then he would die like a dog. Dylan did not have time to defend himself and flew down. But at that moment, what Kevin expected did not happen, and he became even more angry. So it's not a time manipulator. Kevin's face contorted with anger. At this moment, another rollback of time occurred. The time began from the moment a group of teenagers again pressed Dylan before visiting the gym, on which containers were supposed to fall in a minute. But this time, the situation changed. A basketball was flying into Ethan's face from somewhere. Dylan pulled aside and suddenly saw him. It was Kevin. He decided to hold off on the containers, because he now knows that Dylan is not a manipulator and decided to talk to him. He pinned Dylan against the wall and asked if it was his doing that kickback that happened in art class. Sharp fragments of stones flew sharply towards the teenager. Dylan was in fear of how Kevin found him, how he learned that Dylan had a direct connection to that rollback. Kevin threw the basketball away and said that when Dylan tries to save someone and time goes back, Kevin feels it too. Dylan replied that when Kevin kills someone, he also feels those kickbacks. He understood why Kevin kills. He wants to find the very culprit of everything that is happening. But Dylan is also a victim of a manipulator and cannot save anyone. Kevin looked at Dylan from under his brows. He did not know that the teenager resurrected people and was extremely interested in this. And then Dylan was the first to suggest that Kevin act together in order to avoid time rollbacks together and not kill anyone anymore. Kevin came almost close to Dylan and said that what else could he do but kill? Because this time had rolled back much further. Doesn't this mean that due to the frequent rollbacks that were caused in a row, they got mixed up? Dylan confirmed Kevin's guesses. After all, perhaps that's why time rolled back further than usual and Dylan successfully managed to revive the teacher. Kevin demanded that Dylan give all the detailed information about that period of time in the drawing room, which Kevin did not remember, and Dylan told him everything in detail. The moment Kevin entered the classroom, he began killing everyone, including the teacher. Dylan was able to bring her back to life, although he knew it was useless, but he couldn't leave her like that. After this, Kevin attacked Dylan, pointing fragments of sharp objects at him, and at that moment time stopped, or rather slowed down very much. Everyone around was frozen as if on pause, even Kevin. The next moment, everything collapsed and another time rollback was formed. Dylan suggested that during the time rollback, the second one was activated immediately. The rollback of time returned him to the beginning of the lesson, but should have returned him to the moment before the death of the teacher. Kevin began to think. It seems that whoever manipulates time retains memories, Dylan exclaimed. This means that he and Kevin can intercept each other's time rollback, along with memories. Kevin wondered how many times they could roll back time together. He suggested checking it out immediately and right there. Kevin pointed to the hooligans scattered at their feet and suggested starting an experiment on them. He kills, Dylan resurrects, and so on several times. Dylan sharply refused to take part in the murders. Kevin looked with a grin. Did Dylan really feel sorry for these scum who mocked him? Dylan was unperturbed. He again refused. Kevin stated that this would not stop him and he would kill the teenagers over and over again until Dylan agreed. Dylan could not stand it and shouted that he would not do this. Persuasion and threats were useless. Kevin called him an idiot and said that if he did, he would kill Dylan now. At the same moment, a fragment flew in Dylan's direction, straight into his chest. And then Dylan pointed his hand forward and stopped the flying fragment, just as he could stop that multi-ton concrete block. Kevin was angry. Dylan had deceived him. Revival is not his only ability, and he deliberately hid his powers. With a sharp movement, he shot up into the air to attack Delona from above. Dylan did the same. Now both teenagers were floating in the air. He pointed his hand towards his opponent and a bright beam passed across Kevin's cheek. Furious, Kevin screamed at Dylan to do what he told him to do. Kevin pinned Kevin to the wall with unprecedented force, the teenager begged, asking him not to kill and to find another way to solve the problem. Kevin looked at Dylan menacingly and said that he only had 1 day to choose a victim for the experiment. Otherwise, Dylan's family will be dead. A pretty girl entered the class and smiled at everyone. It was Juliana, a new student at the school. Enthusiastic screams were heard in the class. A new classmate from another country caused a storm of emotions in everyone. Juliana walked past the desk where Kevin was sitting, but he didn't even look at her. His thoughts were busy with a plan to catch the manipulator. Dylan was returning home from his part-time job when his mother called and said that a friend was expecting him. It could only be Kevin, but he threatened to kill his family if he refused. Dylan burst into the house like a bullet. He was afraid that something terrible might happen. Kevin sat in Dylan's room and played in the air with the food that Dylan's mom gave him. He abruptly told Kevin to get out of his house. A fork flew at Dylan's head. Kevin continued calmly. He asked if Dylan had chosen the victim for their experiment. Dylan again responded affirmatively with a refusal. Kevin asked with a grin whether Dylan really didn't notice the time rollback because his mother had just been killed. Dylan clenched his teeth and whispered, "Kevin is not a man, he's a scumbag." Kevin was not outraged by Dylan's behavior and replied that his grandmother was next. Dylan angrily shouted that their mixed-up time loops were just a guess, then asked why this experiment was so important to him. The answer was clear: find a time manipulator. Dylan clenched his teeth again. He was afraid for his family and decided to agree, but look for a chance. How to solve the problem using another method. Kevin looked into Dylan's eyes and said, "Now he will decide who will be the victim of the experiment, and he will report about it later." Kevin left Dylan's house and began browsing his social media page. A few days later, there was a knock on Dylan's house. Mom warmly opened the door and said that Dylan would come soon. Kevin sat in his room again and thought about his next step. Mom brought him a snack, and Kevin asked when Dylan's father would come. She replied that her husband died 5 years ago. Then Kevin asked if Dylan had a girlfriend. Mom replied that her son doesn't date anyone. He doesn't have time for that. Then he handed her the phone and showed her a photo found on his page on social networks. Mom said that this is Dylan's younger sister, Cynthia. They are 3 years apart, but she's been living with her aunt since she was 10. The fork slowly rose into the air and stopped in the direction of Dylan's mom. Kevin needed to know what school Cynthia went to. The working day was over, and there was no one on the territory of the plant. Dylan came here for a reason. He wanted to test his abilities. He tried to do the same manipulations as when fighting Kevin when he dropped containers on the school, when a bright beam hurt Kevin's cheek. He took the stone in his palm and prepared himself. Dylan pointed his hand towards the wall, concentrated and let go of the stone. He flew at the speed of a bullet into a brick wall and broke through it. Dylan walked over to the boxes stacked in several rows and tried to do the same. The boxes remained in place, but Dylan was thrown back. It looked like he needed more training. Dylan began to analyze. No matter what he throws towards Kevin, he will be able to stop it. In addition, there are problems with the defense. When Kevin catches him, Dylan is unable to resist him at that moment. He could only attack with his hands, which meant he needed to do it quickly and learn to dodge better. Dylan thought that it wouldn't hurt to have a friend who knew how to fight and didn't notice that someone was watching him all this time. Ethan sat on the roof of the school in thought, his head pounding. Tom woke up before him and was now indignant that someone knocked them out, but he doesn't remember anything. Ethan turned to Tom and told him to come to the roof tonight. There was something to do. He sat on the edge of the roof and waited for Tom. They agreed to meet here in the evening. In the dim light, Ethan saw a figure. It was probably Tom. He had arrived early. Ethan looked closer. It wasn't Tom. At that moment, he felt a strong burning sensation in his wounded hand and howled in pain. Ethan lost his balance and fell screaming. A little later, as promised, Tom appeared. He looked around, but Ethan was not on the roof. He took out his phone and decided to call his peer, surprised that he did not call him. The call came from somewhere below, which means Ethan is already here. He walked to the edge of the roof and looked down. It was Ethan. He lay in a pool of blood and did not move. Tom sat silently in the classroom before the start of the lesson and did not understand what had happened. Then Amelia came up and jokingly asked why Tom is so quiet today and doesn't run around Kevin with his concern. Tom was silent. He was not in the mood to communicate at all, and besides, that night he did not sleep a wink. He recalled the terrible events of that night when the ambulance arrived and took Ethan to the hospital. Amelia said that she was worried about Tom, suggesting that he had a fight with Ethan. Then she turned to Kevin to see what he was doing so intently. Kevin looked at a photo of some girl, then zooming in and out with his fingers. She considered Kevin a psycho and a pervert and decided to move away from him. Suddenly, Ethan's group burst into the classroom and resolutely walked towards Tom. One of the guys sharply kicked Tom. Tom did not understand the attacker's aggression. Amelia, as the class leader, demanded to explain the reason for what they were doing in someone else's class. Kevin silently watched everything that was happening with his peripheral vision. One of the people who broke in insisted that Tom tell them what happened to Ethan. Tom told everything how it happened, and he found Ethan in this condition. Then he called an ambulance. The attacker began to furiously accuse Tom that this was his doing, but Tom claimed that he had already told the police everything, and his parents were also aware. Tom extended his hand to the culprit of the fight, thinking that the conflict had been settled. But he shouted that he would only believe Ethan and would find out everything when his friend woke up. Tom decided that there was nothing more to discuss and silently left the class, the company following him. One of Ethan's friends decided to tease Tom by asking that perhaps Tom would tell the truth to his friend Kevin. Tom sharply said that enough about this. Kevin had nothing to do with it. He was not on the roof at all. At that moment, Tom remembered Kevin's words that he no longer kills pigeons, he kills people. The next thing Tom remembered was Kevin telling him that something unusual was going to happen at school. A little later, Ethan's company identified Dylan and attacked him. They insisted that Dylan admit to being involved in Ethan's downfall. But Dylan claimed that after working part-time, he immediately went home in the evening. The bully slapped Dylan and insisted that he tell the truth. Leaving Dylan alone, they began to wonder who else could do this to their friend. Two schoolgirls were sitting in the school cafeteria and talking peacefully. One of them took out several pills and drank. Seeing her friend's questioning look, she explained that a psychiatrist had prescribed her medications and washed them down with a sip of water. Coming out of the dining room, someone called out to one of the girls. He rudely asked Hana why she was ignoring his calls. A friend asked if they had really broken up, but the guy did not let up and continued to pursue the girl, demanding an explanation and threatening that he would not leave it like that. Hana turned and said threateningly that she could tell everyone what he did to her. She drove him away and told him to forget about her if he didn't want shame. On the street, Hana told her friend that her ex-boyfriend had beaten her more than once. A friend also shared her problem with Hana, saying that her aunt's birthday was coming soon, and she didn't know what to give her. Then one of the guys told the girl that her brother was looking for her. The schoolgirl left the school grounds with the intention of scolding her brother for not calling her in advance. As she came closer, she realized that it was not her brother, it was a stranger standing in front of her. It was Kevin. He smiled welcomingly and introduced himself as his brother's friend. The girl became worried and asked where her brother was. Kevin said that his brother had gone out to buy something, but he had something for his sister. She should wait for him in the cafe. They left the school grounds together and headed to the nearest cafe. Kevin casually asked the schoolgirl to call her brother to hurry up, saying that his phone was dead. The unsuspecting girl took out her phone and started dialing her friend's number. Without allowing the schoolgirl to call, Kevin pointed his hand at her and she, falling to the ground, dropped the phone. Kevin grabbed the phone and dialed the number. Dylan sat at the bus stop and couldn't believe that Tom could do this. He was more sure that Kevin was to blame. It was more like him. Perhaps he had been chosen as a candidate for the experiment, but Dylan could not understand why they would throw him off the roof. Then Dylan got a call, and he took out his phone. The name sister appeared on the screen. There was silence on the phone. Dylan asked his sister what happened, and in response, a male voice said, "Hello, Dylan." It was Kevin's voice. How he found out that he had a sister. Kevin told Dylan that he had chosen Cynthia as the subject of the experiments. He listened in horror to the next message. Today, Kevin will kill Cynthia. Additionally, in order to find out what school Cynthia went to, Kevin had to kill Dylan's mother 13 times. Dylan shouted into the phone that Kevin wouldn't do this and wanted to know where he was so that he could find and take revenge for his mom. Kevin added that he had prepared something in case Dylan refused and did not come to the old abandoned hospital. Dylan was ready to do anything to save his sister. On this rainy evening, the abandoned hospital looked even more ominous. Dylan went inside and called out to his sister. He ran along the floors and corridors shouting, but there was no answer. Suddenly a shadow appeared from the darkness, with a long stick in its hand. Dylan managed to dodge, stumbled, fell on the stone floor and looked up. An unfamiliar bearded man was hanging in the air. It looked like he was dead or very drunk. Dylan tried to get up and called out to Kevin, and in an instant the controlled body of the dead stranger struck him with a stick. A second later, the bearded man was again ready to strike him, but Dylan dodged and ran around the corner. Turning around and seeing that his pursuer had disappeared, Dylan decided to take a breath and catch his breath. A few seconds later, he saw a shadow approaching. The bearded man slowly floated through the air, dragging a stick behind him. He stopped next to Dylan and froze, and again the tip of the stick was directed with powerful force towards Dylan. Dylan was sure that Kevin was somewhere nearby and shouted to him why he was doing this and asked him to return his sister. The end of the stick flew past Dylan's head. Then Kevin appeared and said that his sister was downstairs. Dylan angrily said that if anything happened to his sister, he wouldn't stand for it. Kevin motioned with his eyes to follow him. Running into the hall, Dylan saw his sister lying on the chairs. Dylan rushed to his sister, but a bearded man blocked the way. Kevin told Dylan that his sister was just unconscious and maybe he forgot, because he had to do something. Kevin knew that Dylan had the same abilities and offered a choice. Since he could not kill his sister, he had to kill the homeless man. He suggested that Dylan kill the homeless man, then revive him. And after that, Kevin would kill the homeless man again, and after that, the time rollback would be activated twice. Dylan made a decision. First, he will pretend to help Kevin, and then at the right moment, he will suddenly be able to attack him. He asked Kevin if he could control the murder. Kevin replied that he had tried a lot, setting up accidents, controlling others to kill, tried a lot. Dylan corrected him. No matter what Kevin does, he still cannot understand why the manipulator is interfering. And then Kevin replied that he must kill, for him killing is more important than people's attitude towards him. He patted Cynthia on the head and added that his goal was to destroy humanity. Kevin said that just killing and reviving doesn't mean anything. The time manipulator maintains balance in this world. That's his goal. Kevin continued, "It is possible that this manipulator is not human." From somewhere out of a crevice, a nasty centipede crawled out. It was a centipede. Kevin watched her and continued, "The manipulator has 3 reasons why he interferes. The first is that he is trying to prevent the use of abilities. Second, murders and resurrections can upset the world balance. And third, all these actions can lead to an inevitable disaster. It is possible that the 2 of them are not the only ones whose actions are interfered with by the manipulator." Dylan listened carefully to Kevin and was ready to agree with his reasoning. And then Kevin suggested that Dylan return to the choice. Who to kill, the homeless man or his sister? Dylan pointed his finger at the homeless man and it was obvious. He chose a person he did not know. Kevin asked Dylan to make the next choice. A murder weapon, a stick, or a knife? Dylan snatched the stick from the homeless man's hands. His choice was made. Kevin, seeing Dylan's determination, warned him not to even try anything stupid. Dylan's thoughts were confused. What to do first? Kill the homeless man or save his sister? How to make the right choice in his actions? And then his sister woke up. She opened her eyes, stood up, saw her brother, and asked where she was and what was happening. Kevin, who was sitting next to him, turned to Cynthia and slowly extended his hand to her. At that moment, Dylan rushed towards them. Dylan's eyes grew dim. Something went wrong. At that moment, something happened. Dylan realized with horror that there was a time rollback. But how it was possible that it happened, there were no answers. Kevin, holding a knife in his hands, explained what he had done. He had just killed Dylan, and time had rolled back, and if he approached his sister again, he would kill her. Dylan realized that in the current situation he had no choice. He would have to attack the homeless man and kill him. He saw the fear in Cynthia's eyes and reassured her, saying that he would explain everything to her later, but for now she needed to close her eyes and cover her ears. Cynthia cried and repeated that she wanted to go home, but she listened to her brother and did as he said. Dylan told Kevin that he had changed his mind about the choice of weapon and threw the stick. It was better to kill him right away with a knife than to beat him and waste time. Dylan took a knife and approached the homeless man. He knew that he only had one chance and decided to act as he had trained before. Facing the homeless man, Dylan turned sharply and threw the knife in Kevin's direction. The tip of the knife was already approaching Kevin's head, but suddenly an evil smile appeared on his face. Kevin waved his hand and put his index finger forward towards the tip. The knife stopped a centimeter from his hand. With the next movement, Kevin directed the homeless man's body towards Cynthia. But her ears and eyes were closed in any case. She would not have had time to dodge the homeless man flying towards her. Dylan rushed from behind at Kevin, squeezed him with his hands. Kevin laughed at him and considered his actions very stupid and reckless. Dylan screamed and accused Kevin of killing his mother and kidnapping his sister. After that, did Kevin really expect Dylan to help him? He squeezed Kevin's body with all his strength and used all his strength. Kevin screamed in pain. He experienced sensations that he did not understand. Along with the pain, he felt that he could not move. His body seemed to be magnetized. Dylan did not let go of Kevin. His strength grew and caused unbearable pain to Kevin. He began to lose consciousness. But Kevin gathered his strength, tensed, and almost managed to free himself from Dylan's strong grip. They both fell to the ground. Dylan realized that the shockwave did not work and he decided to use something else. Quickly extending his hand in front of him, Dylan, taking advantage of his opponent's confusion, directed a stream of powerful energy at Kevin. Kevin fell to the ground and closed his eyes, but it was his cunning and thoughtful move. At the same instant, several fragments were lifted into the air and flew towards Dylan, who already thought that he was the winner. Dylan, being nailed to a concrete pillar, heard Kevin's words. He said that he was very surprised at Dylan's abilities. So he held the helpless Dylan, and nearby he could hear the crying of a frightened Cynthia. Kevin enjoyed the moment of victory and seemed in no hurry to move on, but he did not expect what happened next. Cynthia grabbed a stick that was lying nearby and dealt Kevin a sudden and swift blow to the back. Dylan knew that this would not stop Kevin, but would only make the situation worse. Now his little sister was in real danger. Kevin turned around and hit Cynthia with a swing. The stick flew out of her hands and she fell to the floor. Kevin was already standing over the frightened Cynthia, and a sharp knife hovered in the air above her. He looked at Dylan and said that all their actions were a mistake, and now Dylan will be able to enjoy the spectacle of Kevin cutting his sister. This will be the price for her action. At that moment, the knife flew into the head of Cynthia, who was lying on the floor, and Dylan realized that another moment and she would be dead. He gathered all his strength, managed to free his left hand, and directed the flow of his energy towards Kevin, who at that moment had his back to him. The knife thrown by Kevin fell to the floor in front of Cynthia. She was saved. All that remained was to deal with Kevin. Kevin felt that he was losing strength. He bit his lower lip until it bled and could not resist. Dylan's force was so powerful that he not only held Kevin, the homeless man's body was also lifted into the air. Everything in the room was subject to Dylan's forces. The next moment, the sound of glass was heard. Kevin's body flew out of the hospital window and collapsed on the rain-wet ground. Dylan looked at his hands and couldn't believe it. He won. His strength was stronger than Kevin's. Dylan approached his tearful and frightened sister and reassured her that it was all over. They were saved. She was sitting in the middle of the room, looking at the rain outside the window and talking to someone on the phone. The whole house was full of cats and cats. Black, white, tabby, red, fluffy, calm, and playful. She kept telling someone that there was a plan, and it was a seduction plan. Besides, there was a little problem about the incident, but there was no need to worry now. Besides, she improved a few things and now everything will be fine. Hana's ex-boyfriend caught her on the school stairs and insisted on continuing their relationship. Hana looked at him and resolutely refused, reminding him of the bruises that appeared due to the fault of his classmate. She asked to break up on good terms, otherwise the entire class chat would find out about his violence. The guy shouted that she had enraged him again and clenched his fist and swung at Hana. Hana bent over from severe pain and the blow hit her stomach. A classmate grabbed her by the hair and pushed her with force. Hana fell to the floor. He continued to threaten that she would not get rid of him so easily and would not tell anyone about the beatings. Hana put on the hood and buttoned it all the way, completely hiding her face. The guy grabbed the girl by the shoulder to add more blows, but suddenly she turned to him. A terrible mask covered her face and a bright pink light seeped through the fabric. A classmate fell to his knees and realized that he could not breathe. There was horror in his eyes. He did not understand what was happening. He tried to scream, but there was no sound. It was getting worse, and he felt like he was dying. A classmate fell to the ground, writhing because he could not take a breath of air. And Hana stood in front of him. Hana told him to give his word that he would no longer pursue her and would leave her alone. The guy, with his last breath, begged for an end to his torment and burst into tears. Hana took off her hood. Leaving her classmate alone, she still had little control over this power. Someone stood nearby, watched what was happening, and then asked why she didn't finish him off and leave him alive. Hana replied that this was enough, and when using her power she should not kill people. Having calmed down, Dylan and Cynthia left the abandoned hospital. She thought that the guy was her brother's friend, and still couldn't believe everything that was happening, to which Dylan told her that he would tell everything. But later, he believed that Kevin had crossed the line and no longer had any desire to contact him again. When Kevin came to his senses, the rain had already stopped, and he was thinking about what to do next, what to come up with to take revenge. He no longer needed an assistant. He no longer needed time loops to kill everyone. With these thoughts, Kevin flew into the air. He already knew how to proceed. Traffic was busy at this rush hour. The regular bus was following its usual route, but then the driver suddenly braked. Standing and sitting, passengers lost their balance, and panic and crush began on the bus. Kevin was standing in front of the bus in several places. The driver turned the steering wheel sharply to avoid a collision. While the bus was moving, it turned against the traffic and washed out onto the sidewalk, where there were passers-by at that moment. The angry driver looked out the window and shouted to the offender that he was crazy and swore obscenely. But it wasn't enough for Kevin that the passengers were injured. His plan was more interesting. The next moment, in front of the amazed eyes of passers-by, the bus and its passengers flew into the air. But Kevin didn't stop there. It wasn't enough for him. His anger was uncontrollable. All the cars on the roadway also flew into the air and hovered high above the ground. Passers-by, stunned by what they saw, began filming on their phones, assuming that this was some kind of advertisement for new cars. But in the next moment, they too found themselves ascended into the sky. Kevin's face was distorted with anger and anger. He acted cruelly and coldly. He immediately lowered his hands. The bus, cars, and passers-by, everything that was lifted into the sky, Everything flew down at breakneck speed. The entire roadway was covered in blood. There were mountains of corpses and mangled cars. Another time rollback occurred. Later, Kevin climbed onto the roof and sank to his knees. Exhausted, he had used up too much energy, but he would continue to kill until the manipulator appeared. A man and a girl stood on a nearby roof and watched Kevin. The stranger asked the girl what time loop this was, and she replied that it was already the 33rd. They were joined by Hana and the masked man. The man expected them to arrive earlier, but Hana replied that she had something to do. The stranger chuckled and asked if perhaps she was on a date with her boyfriend, but the masked man told him not to talk nonsense and shut up. The tall man continued to speculate on why Kevin wasn't hired earlier with his abilities, but the masked man said that in another universe he was accepted without testing and completely failed. And then the girl with the umbrella exclaimed, "Since he wasn't assigned here, it means he's an intruder." The unanimous decision was made to knock Kevin out before he succeeded. Hana put on her hood and began to act. At this moment, Kevin felt that his condition began to change. Was it really the one he was waiting for that was affecting him? Hana increased her influence, but Kevin still held on. Kevin clearly felt that someone was continuing to attack his mind, but he had to endure it. And then the tall man stopped Hana and said that the first time was enough, and it was time to get out. Kevin opened his eyes. He did not remember the moment he lost consciousness. He considered himself a pathetic loser because recently he longed to kill, but now there was no trace of this desire left. Suddenly he felt a sharp pain in his leg. Perhaps he was injured when he fought with Dylan. Kevin was sitting in the schoolyard. His leg hurt, and he had to temporarily use a crutch. Tom approached him and asked if Kevin was afraid of the consequences when he pushed Ethan off the roof, because he is not as cruel as he wants to seem. Kevin looked at Tom indifferently and said that he did not need moralizing and told him to get out of sight if he doesn't want to die. Tom said emphatically that it seemed like he was very mistaken in considering Kevin his friend. Kevin sat and watched as an offended and disappointed Tom walked away across the schoolyard. Then Juliana, a new student, sat down on the bench. She heard the guys talking and expressed regret that their friendship was over. But Kevin was not interested in the conversation with his classmate. He got up and limped towards school. At that moment, Juliana called out to him, saying that she knew his secret. She showed Kevin the video she had secretly taken, and added that there was more to come. Juliana continued to scroll through the video. There really was a lot of interesting things there. Kevin, with a sudden movement, snatched the phone from her hands and threw it. The phone shattered. And then he heard that there was a saved backup copy. She added with a laugh that if she pressed a button, the videos would go viral on the internet. Angry, Kevin wanted to use his powers, but the crutch fell out. He lost his balance and only pushed Juliana. But this did not stop Juliana. She said that if she had such abilities, she would have done this. Kevin angrily shouted for her to immediately delete the video before he killed her. But Julia was not scared by Kevin's words. She offered a deal. Kevin had to do something. This was Julia's wish. She was absolutely delighted. Small cars, people like ants. Her house was small like a doll's house. Juliana asked to rise higher, even higher to the clouds. And then she suggested to Kevin that he would let her fall into free fall, and then catch her. And Kevin let go. Juliana quickly flew down at breakneck speed. The ground was getting closer, but Kevin was still missing. Seeing the roof of the school, Juliana lost all hope of staying alive. She shrank and closed her eyes. And at the last moment Kevin appeared, he managed to pick up Juliana a few meters from the ground. He flew higher and looked for a place where he could put his unconscious classmate. Sitting on the ledge of the roof of a skyscraper, Kevin waited for Juliana to come to her senses, and thought with irritation that this walk was not at all the right time. He analyzed previous events, remembered Dylan's abilities, and came up with a plan for further action. Soon Juliana came to her senses, sat up and said that she did not remember how Kevin saved her. Kevin said that he had fulfilled her wish and now demanded that the saved copy of the video be immediately erased. Juliana began to cry and said that she could have died, but today was her birthday, and it was a pity that it was spent alone, because her parents were abroad and she had no friends. Kevin angrily said that he did not care about her personal life and demanded that the data be deleted. Juliana threw herself on Kevin's neck and, crying, complained that how could her parents do this to her. He had never been in such a situation and hesitated, not knowing how to behave. The girl began to beg for Kevin to spend this day with her, and began to cry even more. He could not tolerate tears. He just silently touched Juliana and stroked her head. Kevin disappeared for a few minutes and appeared with a piece of cake. He hurried her and continued to insist on deleting the files. But Juliana seemed to be in no hurry. She said that she wanted to make a wish. She said out loud that she asked God to help Kevin become a good person, value life, and use his abilities for the benefit of people. This infuriated Kevin, and he threw the cake aside with his crutch. The cake flew down from the roof of a skyscraper. Juliana rushed after him, but the edge of the roof was so close that she miscalculated and flew down. In an instant, Kevin reached out and turned on his power. Juliana hung funny in the air but was not afraid. It even amused her. Kevin was starting to get annoyed. There were too many problems with this girl. As darkness fell, Dylan was back at the plant. He decided to continue training to learn to control his strength. In an instant, the package of materials flew into the air but immediately fell to the ground. Dylan concentrated and tried again. But the boxes, having risen to a small height, fell again. He carefully examined his hands to see if all his strength had gone out when he was saving his sister. Dylan caught himself thinking that in those moments when he met with Kevin, his power increased, which means he somehow influences Dylan. He suggested that someone might be transferring or redistributing power. All this time, someone stood on the roof of the plant and watched Dylon's actions. You must always keep an eye on those who have power and control their actions. Kevin and Juliana continued to sit on the roof. She became interested in her classmate's ability. She looked at Kevin and said that maybe she was wrong. He wasn't such a bad person. Kevin stood silently and looked at the city lights. Juliana asked when Kevin felt the manifestation of his abilities. He replied that it all started after the disaster in the mountains, and then added that she should not try to find out more. Juliana asked if Kevin really hadn't used his power for good before meeting her. Kevin said to stop talking nonsense and delete the files. Juliana quietly said that she lied to him. In fact, there were copies of the files on her computer. She playfully added that if he came to her tomorrow, he could delete the files himself. Kevin replied that he had no desire to come to her. But Juliana persistently continued to insist on her own, promising that she would cook something tasty, and now they could have lunch together. Without answering anything, Kevin soared into the air and then heard that Juliana would be waiting for him tomorrow. He was irritated by Juliana's presence, and decided that as soon as he deleted the files, he would kill her. Juliana was watching Kevin retreat when two people approached her from behind. She assured them that everything would work out tomorrow and this time it would all be over. Cynthia was lying in her room and talking on the phone. It was Dylan calling. He was worried about her health. He heard his sister repeat that she was surprised at his abilities. Couldn't his strength really help Mom get back on her feet? Why didn't he save Dad? Dylan replied that he was still small then and did not know about his abilities. Cynthia was silent for a while, and then turned to her brother with a request to help her friend, who was being terrorized by her ex-boyfriend. The door was opened with a strong kick, causing it to fly off its hinges with a roar. Only Kevin could have done this, and it really was him. Juliana looked out, looked at the door, and invited her classmate to go into the house she was just cooking in the kitchen. It was the first time she cooked something, and asked for forgiveness in advance if something went wrong. Kevin said he wasn't hungry, and was only there to delete the files. Then cats of different colors and breeds ran out to him. Kevin walked into the kitchen and asked Juliana where the computer was. Without waiting for an answer, he himself went into the room. But it was empty. There was a single chair and many cats. Juliana approached him and handed him the prepared sandwich. Kevin took the plate and Juliana went to the kitchen to get milk. Kevin asked about the computer again and the classmate replied that it wasn't there. Kevin was furious. He was ready to kill her now. Juliana admitted that she lied, that all the files were only on the phone, and suggested that they discuss this over food. And at that very moment, she found herself in the air, pressed against the wall. Juliana exclaimed that if Kevin did this, he would really regret it. Kevin said he'd had enough of the lies and used the force that would kill Juliana. The classmate fell to the floor and fell silent. Kevin stood, looked at his classmate, and waited for time to roll back. The time loop was about to go off. But time passed and nothing changed. Kevin didn't understand because she was dead, and there had to be a rollback of time. Perhaps the force used was not enough and she is still alive. Kevin screamed in rage. Time did not return. He put his hand on Juliana, felt a familiar feeling, and realized that she too could control time. Did she really die so simply and so stupidly? And then a white cat came up to him and began to rub against his leg. Kevin rushed to Juliana and tried to revive her by performing direct cardiac massage. All efforts were useless. Juliana was dead. At that moment, the door opened and two people entered. As if not noticing Kevin, one told the other that she knew it was early, and now she needed to think about what to do. The second, in turn, sighed and said that this was another failure. Suddenly, Juliana appeared, alive and well, saying that this was not a failure, but a success. Kevin couldn't believe his eyes, because he himself saw her dead and couldn't revive her. He turned and saw her also lying on the floor. Juliana told the girl that this was truly a success. One of the strangers present objected, saying what a success it is if nothing has changed, and said to return time to Juliana. Juliana flatly refused to do this. After all, Kevin tried to save a person for the first time, regretting that he had killed someone. Both girls agreed that this had never happened before. Juliana exclaimed that they had finally found the turning point. Then Kevin intervened and asked to be told what was going on here. Then all three turned at the same time and looked at Kevin. Then Juliana came up to him and asked how sad he was when he killed her and she died. Kevin did not answer, but only asked to tell everything because she knows something. Juliana laughed and said that the show was about to begin. One of the girls took off her mask. It was Juliana. The second girl took off her glasses, and it was her again. Both girls laughed and waved to Kevin. It was 2 Julianas. And now 3 Julianas stood before him, and the fourth one, whom he killed, was also Juliana. Kevin decided that this was the one who controlled time. He gathered his power and decided to act. Again, fragments appeared from nowhere. They took off and rushed towards the girls. They stood without moving. The fragments stopped. And then one of the Julians said that they were not the ones Kevin was looking for. But don't be disappointed. They have a very attractive offer for him. Juliana said that she knows how to get rid of the time loop, which is a problem for Kevin. They will help Kevin in return for the assistance provided. Kevin asked what would happen if he refused. Juliana folded her arms across her chest and replied that if he doesn't help, he will remain in a time loop forever. Kevin didn't believe them and said it was just a bluff and he would kill them if they didn't tell him what to do. Instantly, hundreds of fragments fell on the girls. Juliana said that the offer is still valid and Kevin should agree. He grinned and said that he had only one answer. They must die. Spatters of blood scattered in all directions and bloody shards crashed into the wall. As he expected, having killed 3 at once, time did not turn back. Kevin shouted furiously that he was God or man. Let him come out and show himself. And suddenly someone asked Kevin who he was yelling at. All 3 girls stood before him alive. One of them said, "If he likes to relieve stress so much, then he can kill them as much as he wants. There are plenty of them. They have different personalities, but the same memories." Kevin turned around and looked in the direction where they lay dead, just killed by shrapnel. Kevin turned around again, and here they were standing in front of him alive. The door opened slightly and Kevin saw about several dozen more clones of Juliana. One of the Julians reminded Kevin of the time Ethan fell from the school roof. Someone pushed him down. The girls were to blame for this, and many blamed Kevin. One of the girls approached Kevin and asked if he was interested in finding out who they were. The girl added that he would not lose anything if he helped them, and besides, he would get the opportunity to escape the time loop. Kevin decided to trust them and help, but first he asked them to get dressed. He decided to hold off on killing them for now, since they promised him to get rid of the time loop. On the edge of the roof stood a desperate employee of the company, whom the director accused of being involved in the fact that the company suffered heavy losses. After all, the director used to praise him, but now he humiliates him with his accusations. The employee was tired of it all and was ready to jump. At that moment, from somewhere above, a bright beam pierced the young man's body. The employee felt like a victim of some kind of hypnosis. Someone began to control his consciousness. The skyscraper on whose roof he stood seemed to be covered with a red, transparent dome. Some voice in his head ordered him to do this. The employee opened his eyes, which glowed with a bright light, and said that he would fulfill this wish. Juliana went to the window and asked Kevin to join her. She pointed to the city and asked if he noticed anything unusual. Kevin looked out the window. Rooftops, clear sky. Nothing strange. Juliana handed him a box of lenses and offered to put them on. Kevin refused her, saying that he did not like this idea at all. Juliana approached Kevin and began to forcefully try to insert the lenses into his eyes. The girl pressed on him and shouted that he should not blink. Everything was almost ready. Kevin squinted his eyes out of habit. Everything around was blurry. The feeling was unpleasant. Gradually, his eyes got used to the lenses, and he saw a tall building covered with a red dome. Someone was standing on the roof of the building. Juliana said that Kevin must deal with this man. Teach him. This is their request. Then she added that the situation would be a little absurd, but there was no need to be surprised. The company office was empty. Employees were absent from their places. One of the workers was already dead and lying on the floor in a pool of blood. All company employees were gathered in one room and sat obediently on the floor. Their hands were raised up and their actions looked like some kind of incomprehensible game. The young man, sticking out his little finger, sat opposite them and smiled sarcastically. Shouts were heard from the crowd. One of the employees said that she was pregnant and begged to be let go. The second one also asked to be let go, since he had only recently worked here. The young man repeated to them that they would live until all their fingers were bent. The director of the company, who had only one finger left, asked if he needed a promotion, bonus, or increase. He would do it if the manager would let him go. And then the director's finger bent at the manager's behest. The director fell dead to the floor. The manager burst out laughing and said that a little more, and they would all be dead. Another employee began to beg his colleague not to kill him, because he had a wedding in a week. But the young man said that in any case he would kill everyone. Such was their fate. Kevin and Juliana stood near a skyscraper covered with a red dome. She explained to him that this field was a temporary space, created without permission, in which murder or destruction was committed, and Kevin had to deal with the attacker who created it. Juliana reminded him that Kevin had powerful abilities and could handle this with ease. Kevin asked who he was and who they were. Gods, aliens. Juliana promised that he would find out everything as soon as he was done with this. She extended her palm to him and said that now they would enter this field. He must hold her hand, and he could not enter alone. Juliana advised Kevin to put on lenses so that he could see everything that would happen inside. Having stepped into the red field area, they were immediately carried away in time. Juliana held Kevin's hand tightly, because if he let her go, he would get lost here forever and would not be able to return. There was only one surviving employee in the company office lobby. All the others were dead. The manager told him that it was his turn now and this would all be over. The employee, frightened and wanting to live, rushed to the exit as fast as he could, hoping for salvation. But he was immediately overtaken by the force of the manager and fell dead on his face on the floor. The sound of broken glass was heard from behind. Kevin and Julia were hanging in the air in front of the young man. Juliana, seeing the mountains of corpses, exclaimed that destroying an entire company is a talent. The manager bowed and replied that she still had no right to punish him. Juliana told him that he had added a lot of work to her, and besides, the rules had changed, and now there was a limit to the manipulation of human memory. The manager decided to clarify. This means that now the law on punishments has changed, and perhaps her friend the manager is here precisely for this. She explained to the young man that Kevin is not a manager, but a person. The manager laughed. Could a simple person really punish him now? Juliana replied that his laughter was in vain. Kevin is quite strong and can handle the manager. The young man said that he didn't care whether he was a person with superpowers or someone else. He could easily cope with him. He began to clown around. Oh, how he would cope with a superhero, because he had no free fingers left. He spent everything on the company's employees. But don't be upset, there's one more left, just in case. The manager started teasing Kevin to attack and show what he was capable of. Kevin made a familiar wave of his hand, and the fragments flew towards the manager. He dodged, but one fragment still touched his unusual finger. The manager said that he was surprised, and added that anyway, people were created for games and did not deserve help. They were just toys. He lifted his finger and added that Kevin couldn't beat the manager. With these words, he extended his finger towards Kevin and began to attack. But Kevin got ahead of him. He directed a bundle of energy at the manager and concentrated. At that same moment, he found himself in the air, hanging at a high altitude. Kevin said only one word, boring, and made a jerk with his hand. The finger was broken and twisted in the opposite direction. The manager howled in hellish pain. Kevin changed the direction of his hand, and the manager went flying down. Kevin went down to the ground to make sure the manager was dead. And then Juliana said that she was mistaken. They cannot kill him. The manager said that they had entered an alien dimension, and this was regarded as an invasion, and an attack was impossible. With these words, he again extended his mutilated finger and aimed at Kevin. At this moment, Kevin suddenly felt someone's third force, someone's outside interference. It was one of Juliana's clones. For some time, the manager was neutralized. Kevin realized that she had mental attack abilities. He said he had to finish off the manager. Juliana replied that punishment was their business, and he needed to focus on the invasion. Then the second clone of Juliana appeared, saying that he gets tired quickly, so they should help him. She added that Kevin is too relaxed, and now only the one with mental abilities is alive. At this moment, the manager came to his senses again and tried to attack. Juliana turned to Kevin and shouted that it was time to finish him off. And suddenly, the manager screamed at the top of his lungs for Kevin to stop. Something was wrong, but Kevin was ready to trust Juliana more than the manager and used his strength. The manager was pinned against the wall and could not move. A second later, he was buried under a pile of rocks and concrete, his blood seeping through his targets and dripping onto the ground. Instantly, the red transparent dome began to distort, and the building began to lose its shape. Juliana said that time has begun to collapse, and Kevin has 30 minutes to escape. If they had missed the intruder, the manager, then everything that happened through his fault would have instantly turned into reality. Both Juliana clones said they had a nice time and needed to leave. Juliana told Kevin that she would introduce him to them, but later, when the time was right. And here, no matter who Kevin kills, the time loop doesn't work. He stood at the window of his room and watched passers-by on the street. It was suspiciously quiet. Had he really given up? This worried Dylan, but he knew he had to remain vigilant and careful. The guy was sitting in the back seat of the car and then asked what about his request. He was pointed to a box standing between the seats. The guy exclaimed with joy, "An electric shocker, this is what you need." While there was still time, Juliana and Kevin continued their conversation. Kevin asked her that if he kills here, it will help get rid of the time loop. Juliana confirmed her guesses, adding that Kevin could kill as much as he wanted, and they would deal with the intruders. She seriously said that there is no point in killing ordinary people. He needs to continue cooperation because they are the only ones who can help him. Approaching the elevator, Juliana said that next time, to continue the case, Kevin will meet other people with superpowers, and about 50 people have been discovered. Already in the elevator, Juliana told Kevin that there are 4 types of superpowers, and he will have to get to know them. Juliana continued to say that all those 50 people also killed and also fell into time loops. She added that they are still looking for the culprit who created all this. Kevin thought that if this is a person, then by killing everyone, he will be able to find the one who controls time. He decided to go ahead with a plan in which he would pretend to be on their side and then kill everyone. Hana was returning home along a dark alley, and the road lay ahead through a construction site. Suddenly she heard some sounds. It seemed like a cat meowing. Hana headed deeper into the construction site to where the sounds were heard. She saw a cat tied with iron wire to a concrete slab. Hana tried to free her and asked her to be patient. She was sure that someone did this on purpose. Someone coughed from behind and Hana turned around. It was her ex-boyfriend Ricky. He sharply extended the stun gun in her direction and turned it on. Hana was writhing in pain. She thought that Ricky had left her behind and would no longer pursue her. Ricky screamed at her, demanding to know what she did to him on the landing when he almost died. With these words, he again pointed the stun gun at her. At that moment, someone came up from behind and called out to the teenager. Ricky turned around sharply and pointed the stun gun at the stranger's chest. Hana came to her senses and decided to help the stranger deal with Ricky. But it seems that the stranger was able to stand up for himself. A sharp pain pierced Ricky's hand, and he dropped the stun gun. The stranger said that if the teenager ever dared to hurt Hana again, he would regret it. Ricky jumped up and ran away from them, shouting that they were going to lose anyway. Hana looked carefully at the stranger. His voice was familiar to her, and besides, these abilities, this is Dylon. He took off his hood, and turning to Hana asked how she was feeling. She replied that she was fine and asked to release the cat. Dylon untangled the wire, and the cat instantly disappeared into the darkness. Hana asked how he came here, how he knew about the conflict between her and Ricky, to which Dylan replied that Cynthia, his sister, told him everything. The girl laughed and said that she was Hana and could handle it herself. Ricky stood around the corner and listened carefully to their entire conversation, but felt that something was wrong with him. He managed to film everything on his phone camera. Dylan decided to accompany Hana so that she could get home safely. She asked him how he ended up here, to which Dylan replied that this is the place where he wants to be alone. Hana asked where he learned to defend himself so well. Dylan answered with a smile that he was the only man in the family and he didn't have to choose. Hana looked at him and thought that his power was stronger than the stun gun, which is why it didn't work. Ricky followed them, still filming, and wondered what they might have in common. Maybe Hana had broken up with him because of him. He whispered menacingly that he would deal with this, even if he had to commit murder. A tipsy group sat cheerfully in a karaoke club and demanded more drinks. Then a bar employee ran in and shouted that someone was coming towards them. 3 masked men entered the bar booth holding bats. One of the guys yelled at them to leave the premises immediately before things got worse. The second of the company asked who sent them. Hearing the answer that no one, the bat flew at the guy's head. He grabbed a knife from the table and rushed at the masked enemy. At that moment, the second man in the mask hit the attacker with a bat and he fell. The leader of the company told the masked people that if they want money, he will give them more than they have ever seen. But he replied that he had nothing that he could give them. The guy begged and asked not to kill him, but his pleas went unheeded. The attackers left the bar, settled in the park, and took off their masks. One of the guys, who seemed to be the leader, said that although they had done the dirty work, their safety was guaranteed. Then he made his partners happy. They will receive the money tomorrow. Then the phone rang and the guy looked at the phone screen. It was Ricky. He said that he would now send a photo of one idiot and asked to deal with him. It was Dylan's photo. The guy looked angrily at the photo he received and said that he had finally been caught. Dylan was heading home in the evening after working part-time. The street was empty, only a lone car parked at the sidewalk. Dylan caught up with the car, and at that moment the car doors opened. Tom was returning from the store and checking the grocery list in his phone's address book. Chicken, lettuce, onions. He forgot to buy potatoes. Tom turned his bike around and headed back to the store. He came alongside a car standing by the road. Something was happening there. They tried to force someone into the car. Tom recognized Dylan. He was unconscious from the blows inflicted on him. At that moment, the car started moving and rushed along the road. Tom pressed on the pedals and followed the car in which Dylan was. He pedaled furiously and was afraid to lose sight of the car. Helpless, Dylan sat in the car with his hands tied and a bag over his head. The car turned off the highway and headed out of town. It was out of sight. Tom fell to the ground exhausted. He had no strength left to pursue. He was experiencing severe pain in his legs. Something had to be done. He had to contact the police. The car stopped near an abandoned factory. By this time, Dylan had already come to his senses and did not understand what had happened to him. In front of him, at the head of a group of teenagers, stood a guy he knew. Dylan recognized him. It was the same bully who bullied his grandmother and who later received reprisals. He hit Dylan in the face and asked what kind of electrical charge appears during an attack. Perhaps it was a stun gun. Ricky, standing next to him, explained that he searched Dylan. There was nothing on him. The bully leaned over Dylan and told him to show him how he did it. He turned to the group of teenagers and said that Dylan could choose his victim. Ricky brought out 2 beaten guys. These were Dylan's friends. Dylan asked to let them go and agreed to show his strength, but only in private. The teenagers tied his hands with ropes and left, leaving Dylan alone with the leader. He concentrated and his hands lit up with a bright pink electric glow. The guy came closer to take a closer look and asked if he touched it. Would the power work or not? The leader grabbed one of the beaten teenagers and ordered him to show him. Dylan did not want to do this and replied that he could not use his power just like that. The bully told his partners to pull the ropes to the sides to hurt Dylan. Seeing Dylan's inaction, the leader said he wanted to visit his grandmother again. At that moment, the creak of the door opening was heard. It was Tom. He saw Dylan and exclaimed what they did to him. Ricky replied that they didn't care who he was and told him to get out of here, but Tom was determined and prepared for a fight. At that moment, blows from 3 attackers fell on him. Tom suddenly grabbed one of the teenagers and lifted him off the ground. Blows from sticks immediately flew into his back. Immediately, another blow was struck to Tom's head. He collapsed unconscious on the floor in front of his attackers. The beaten teenagers lay down and watched everything that was happening. They had completely lost hope of salvation. The leader ordered his partners to bring water and bring Tom to his senses. Then Tom suddenly jumped up and attacked the leader. He delivered a powerful blow to his opponent's jaw, and the next blow immediately followed. The leader wiped the blood from his face, grinned, and invited Tom to work with them. Tom threatened that if they didn't stop now, he would call the police. The leader offered a deal. If Tom defeats him, then they will release Dylan. Tom took a fighting stance and was the first to strike the leader, but the teenager managed to instantly dodge the blow. And at that moment, Tom received a blow to his side. The blow was strong and Tom stood staggering in front of the enemy. The teenager looked at Tom and teased him about how he was trying to win if he was so slow, and everything around him began to blur. Tom and Dylan stood in the schoolyard and Tom couldn't understand why Dylan was apologizing. Dylan handed Tom his favorite sweets, but that was all later. Tom stopped his opponent's fist with one movement, and the next moment Tom furiously rushed to the attack. The enemy managed to dodge again. Taking advantage of the moment, Tom grabbed the leader by the hair. He struck Tom in the head instantly. Tom grabbed the leader by the hair with both hands and hit him on the bridge of his nose with his forehead. Blood gushed from his opponent's nose and he fell to his knees. Ricky shouted to his teammates that it was time to intervene and end this. Dylan, tied up, shouted to warn Tom that he was being attacked from behind. Tom, in a rage, rushed at the teenager who was holding Dylan on a rope. He knocked him down with one blow. The rope fell out of the teenager's hands. Dylan's other hand was still being held. Tom did not have time to free Dylan. A strong blow stopped him and Tom fell to the ground. Dylan looked in horror at the lying Tom and realized that something needed to be done. With one hand free, he decided to do something he had practiced several times. Using force, he lifted the rope. Dylan made a sudden movement, and the rope quickly flew towards one of the opponents. He couldn't believe he had done it. The enemy was lying unconscious on the ground. Dylan made a second motion with his hand and directed the rope towards the teenagers. The rope, like a living snake writhing in the air, knocked all opponents off their feet. Dylan approached the exhausted Tom lying on the floor. He tried to help him get up, but Tom couldn't walk on his own. Then Dylan put him on his back and they ran out of the hangar. The leader looked after them and said that this was not the end. Having moved to a safe distance, the guys decided to take a break. Dylan asked Tom how he found out about his whereabouts. Tom began to tell him that he was returning from the store. But Dylan didn't listen to Tom. He turned around at an incomprehensible noise. A car with teenagers who had just attacked them was rapidly approaching from behind. The guys rushed to the side to dodge the car that was about to overtake them. Tom made a sharp jump and jumped to the side of the road a meter from the car. Dylan tried to do the same, but a second of delay did not give him the opportunity to remain unaffected. The car rushed past at breakneck speed, kicking up dust and dirt in its wake. The leader, sitting behind the wheel and seeing the fallen Dylan in the side mirror, was not going to leave Tom alive. He turned the steering wheel with a sharp movement to turn the car in the opposite direction. The car began to skid into the oncoming lane along which a truck was moving. The leader turned the steering wheel in the opposite direction to avoid a collision. The car was carried off the road to the side of the road, and it crashed into a barrier at high speed. Dylan, thrown to the side of the road by the car, lay motionless. Tom, who had come to his senses, quickly walked towards Dylan. At that moment, a truck was approaching Dylan, which a few seconds earlier had miraculously avoided an accident. Tom was terrified that the truck would crush Dylan. The driver, who noticed a man whose hands were lying on the road late, decided to turn the steering wheel, but lost control. The truck overturned, and at great speed it was carried sideways towards the unconscious Dylan. After the truck came to a complete stop, Tom walked towards where Dylan was lying. He was afraid of what he might see next. Tom was horrified by what he saw. He almost lost consciousness and tears appeared in his eyes. He tore the sleeves off his sweater with a sharp movement. There was no other choice. Tom didn't yet understand whether Dylan was alive or not, but he had to do it as quickly as possible. The truck, with its multi-ton weight, tore off Dylan's hands and dragged them a few more tens of meters. Tom instantly pulled what was left of his hands so that Dylan would not die from loss of blood. The ambulance was already rushing along the night road, Tom called it. At this time, the gang leader came to his senses and was groaning in pain due to his injuries. He, limping and cursing, headed deeper into the forest. The ambulance officer asked Tom the necessary questions and listened carefully to his story about what happened. Tom asked for urgent help from Dylan, and perhaps the truck driver, who was supposed to be inside the cab, needed help. In the darkness of the forest, someone stood and silently watched everything that was happening. It was Juliana. She could now erase the memories of his superpower from his memory, but she decided to observe a little more. Dylan was carefully loaded onto a stretcher and placed in the ambulance cabin. The excited Tom was by his side until the last moment. Juliana thought, the accident was not planned, but perhaps it's worth giving a chance to wake up. The Creator will be happy. Dylan's grandmother and mother sat in the hospital waiting room and worried that Dylan would survive. Tom approached Dylan's mother and tried to calm her down. Dylan, with the remains of his hands bandaged, lay unconscious in the hospital room, and who knows when he will come to his senses. Kevin and Juliana sat in the school stadium and watched the school children play. Kevin shared with her his opinion that perhaps the time loop was mixed up. Something was wrong. Juliana replied that he could come back, but if something goes wrong, then the return will not happen, no matter how hard Kevin tries. Ethan's company was still terrorizing the school children, trying to find the culprit behind his fall from the roof. And then someone called the main one and said that perhaps the one involved in this incident would find him. A group of teenagers walked resolutely to school. The informer pointed to the door where Kevin was. Two big guys entered the classroom and, in front of the amazed students, stopped in front of the desk where Kevin was sitting. He seemed to be sleeping and did not hear strangers entering the classroom. The informer with glasses came up to Kevin and lightly pushed him on the shoulder. The high school students ordered him to wake Kevin up. One of the big guys came up, pushed the informer away, and pressed Kevin's head to the desk. Kevin raised his head and looked at the high school student. And then, as if nothing had happened, he took a position that was convenient for him. This angered the big man, and he swung his hand to strike Kevin. But then someone stopped the high school student with a sharp movement. It was Ethan's friend. He suggested not to rush to use physical force in front of everyone. He had a different plan. He turned to Kevin and suggested they go out and chat. And then the familiar red dome began to cover the classroom. Juliana exclaimed in horror that this could not be allowed to happen at school. But it was too late. Someone burst into the space. The entire school area suddenly found itself under a red transparent dome. This did not bode well. Juliana felt that someone had really broken into the school, and she needed Dylan urgently. Juliana's clone, currently in the hospital, mentally relayed the information to Juliana that Dylan and his family were not at school right now. Juliana made a decision. She needed to defend herself by attracting other people. Dylan's mother, who had been sitting by his bed all this time, exclaimed with joy as her son came to his senses. Dylan apologized for making them worry and said he didn't remember anything. He tried to lean on his hands to stand up on the bed, but for some reason he couldn't. Dylan looked in horror at the stumps of his hands and did not understand what had happened. The high school student's face changed before the eyes of the amazed school children. Kevin looked at its color and began to suspect that it was another intruder. One of his friends asked with interest and fear what happened and if he was okay. The guy turned and with an evil smile replied that he felt just great. Then he looked at his classmate and said, now he's interested in his well-being. And at that same moment, a huge leech appeared and crawled over the classmate's body. He was dumbfounded with horror. The leech crawled up to his mouth, and no matter how the unfortunate man resisted, it forcibly penetrated his body. Here the guy's memory seemed to be erased. He silently, as if under hypnosis, slowly walked towards the exit. But not having time to go out into the corridor, he collapsed dead on the floor with a roar. The guy stood up again and, not remembering anything, tried to walk to the exit. And he collapsed on the floor again, writhing in excruciating pain. And suddenly he instantly jumped up and grabbed the first passing schoolboy with his teeth. Blood sprayed from his neck. The brutal one threw the poor guy to the floor and began to eat his flesh. School children began to run away in horror, and desperate daredevils tried to film it on their phones. Then Kevin received a message on his phone to urgently go out into the corridor. There's an intruder there. And at that time, the brutal man tore at everyone who got in his way. And then he jumped into the classroom and furiously attacked Kevin. At that moment, the entire classroom was illuminated with a bright pink light and, distraught, breaking the glass, he flew out into the street. Those who had been bitten by the rabbit began to gradually change, and also attack the school children, biting and tearing them apart. Kevin made a gesture with his hand, and the attackers were instantly knocked out by chairs and tables flying at them. Frightened, Juliana ran into the classroom and asked if Kevin was hurt, if he'd been bitten. Kevin realized that he now needed to kill the intruder. Juliana warned him, saying that if Kevin fails, then everything that happens will turn into reality. Then she looked to the side, and thought that it looked like there was someone else here. Tom sat on the bench and talked to his mother. She asked him to come in. Before Tom had time to turn off the phone, he heard terrible screams and squeals nearby, and he looked to the side. Some big guy attacked a schoolboy and brutally bit his neck. The first thing he thought was that they were filming some kind of film, but neither the cameras nor the film crew were visible. At that moment, he felt a sudden but very powerful blow. Some kind of red ray pierced his head. Tom fell to his knees in pain, and feeling that something was happening to him, he closed his eyes. When he stood up and opened his eyes, it was no longer Tom. The entire territory of the school was under a red transparent dome, and inexplicable things were happening there. Hundreds of attackers and hundreds of victims who also became killers. Juliana said that one of the intruders was outside, and Kevin decided to start with him. She added that Kevin should be careful because if he is bitten, he will also turn into a zombie. And at that moment, one of the huge creatures resembling a leech appeared. It was heading towards them. Another second and this vile creature will take over Julia's body. The consequences will be irreversible. Kevin managed to react, and pointing his pen at her, pierced her through, thereby saving Juliana. The huge leech was nailed to the floor, writhing, but was already safe. Juliana assumed that this was a carrier created by an invader, and she was his assistant. The entire corridor was filled with wandering and groaning zombies. They wandered through the offices and looked for new victims. Juliana tried to carefully look out of the classroom. Kevin wanted to help, and with a wave of his hand, he opened the door for her. The door creaked, and dozens of zombies immediately turned around, seeing Juliana come out into the corridor. The possessed instantly rushed towards her. Juliana began to fight back as best she could. Kevin instantly came to her aid. He lifted the table into the air and threw it towards the attackers, thereby blocking their path. The zombies were trapped, and the table crashed into the wall, crushing several of them. Juliana was angry for his help and said that just a second ago she too could have become a zombie, to which Kevin replied that she would not have died anyway. To which Juliana replied that in this situation it's the same thing, or Kevin wants to see what she looks like as a zombie. Juliana again carefully looked into the corridor through the window and realized that something was wrong. All the zombies were walking along the corridor in the same direction, and were not wandering in a chaotic order. She suggested that it was for a reason, that there was something there, something that attracted them. Kevin said he would go there and told Juliana not to leave the classroom. He flew out the window and Juliana shouted after him so that he would remember about the second intruder. She told herself that she needed to get everyone ready as soon as possible. But what did she mean? Kevin hovered in the air and watched from above everything that was happening in the schoolyard. He noticed that the entire maddened crowd was heading towards the gym. Perhaps someone was luring them there. Someone was there. Kevin turned and saw Tom, who was moving around the school grounds in huge leaps. Tom landed with his back almost next to Kevin, but did not see him. Kevin wondered if he too had something to do with the situation. Tom exclaimed to himself enthusiastically that he liked his new body much more than the previous one. He looked angrily at the crowd of zombies in the yard and said that it looked like we could start already. Kevin noticed that Tom was not behaving like the rest of the infected. He had become huge. Perhaps the invader had entered his body and was now controlling Tom. Now Kevin didn't have the slightest desire to stick his head out until he came up with a plan on how to act and understood what was happening. Kevin assumed that there was some kind of conflict between the two invaders, or that they simply wanted to compete. And the enraged Tom was already shouting to the second intruder to come out and fight. Kevin realized that he had no choice. This time it would be a very difficult fight, and he decided to hit his weak points. A crowd of zombies, as if under hypnosis, obediently followed into the school gym. The second intruder sat in the gym and counted the possessed school children arriving there. Each leech crawling onto his body was a zombie student. The invader shouted enthusiastically that he needed more zombies, even more. Tom's huge finger broke the glass in the gym and continued to challenge the second intruder to a fight. Then Tom's huge head appeared in the window. He looked for the second intruder and shouted that his patience was running out. He shouted in response that he told him to choose something simpler and that he needed 50 more zombies. Tom prepared his fists and said that quantity will not change anything. He is still much stronger. Several students managed to escape from the central building and tried to escape by leaving the school grounds. Amelia, the class leader, decided that they had already broken away from the pursuit and suggested leaving the territory through the back door. They rushed to the gate, which fortunately for them was open. And then one of the students, who was the first to try to run outside the school, seemed to stumble upon an invisible barrier and was thrown back. Amelia slowly extended her hand forward. Something was blocking the passage, and then she noticed a passing woman on the opposite side of the sidewalk. The guys started shouting that there were zombies in the school and asking for help, but the woman did not hear them. The barrier blocked the sound. The woman noticed excited school children standing at the school gates, saw them waving their hands, but did not hear them, and did not see the red dome over the school. The school children, trying to escape, did not notice how several huge leeches were crawling up to them from behind. One of them was already rushing towards Amelia at breakneck speed. It was inevitable. Kevin stood on the roof and watched from around the corner as an angry Tom walked back and forth through the air. He repeated that he was getting bored. Kevin was thinking about what would be the only correct solution, even if he also increased to Tom's size. Finding the weak point would not change. Kevin looked around. There was a pile of metal pipes lying nearby. He decided to use them as a weapon. He swung and one of the pipes ended up in his hand. He had to hit it right in the heart and he only had one attempt. Kevin jerked his hand sharply and the pipe flew towards Tom. He hoped that everything would happen before he was noticed. But Tom noticed it, instantly increased in size, became even larger, and the pipe turned out to be no more than a toothpick for him. Tom turned to Kevin and thanked him with a grin for the entertainment. It was becoming fun. Kevin didn't stop there. He lifted stone fragments into the air and aimed them at Tom. Tom suddenly threw his hand forward to stop the stones. Kevin flew to the roof where Tom was on and prepared for close combat. Even though their size difference was noticeable, Kevin almost managed to dodge when Tom tried to grab him. Kevin was almost in his hands, but he found his bearings in time and directed a powerful stream of energy towards Tom. Tom opened his palm and Kevin flew down. An angry Tom didn't let him fall. It would be too simple and boring, and he pushed Kevin away with force. Kevin, unable to resist Tom's powerful energy at that moment, crashed forcefully into the wall of the school. Tom laughed, seeing Kevin still alive, who managed to soften the blow with his strength. He said that now is the time to destroy everything and pointed dozens of stones at Kevin. And suddenly Tom saw a huge ball above his head, created by Kevin from many stones. It was approaching Tom. He looked up and laughed and said that this was a childish and useless trick. Tom sharply threw his hand up, and in one movement stopped the stone ball flying towards him. Exhausted, Kevin sat down on the ground and only muttered that the ability to annoy people still does not leave Tom. He was hoping for at least the slightest respite, but Tom's fist suddenly caught up with him. Tom squeezed Kevin in his hand, lifted him high into the sky and said that his superpower was nothing. He could say goodbye to his life. And at that moment, some unknown force threw Tom up. Something was wrong. Someone else intervened in the fight. Kevin turned and sure enough, it was a guy who apparently also had super strength. The stranger approached Tom again and struck him with a powerful blow with his fist. He had a force much greater than Kevin, and the impact sent Tom crashing to the ground. And then the stranger turned and shouted to Kevin to be careful and look back. A crowd of zombies was approaching Kevin from behind, those teenagers who had recently tried to escape through the back gate of the school. Suddenly, a girl blocked the way of this crowd. A sharp object was sticking out of her palm. It seemed to be her murder weapon. Then another stranger appeared, furiously killing zombies, and he said that the fun was about to begin. Standing with his back to the girl and defending himself from zombies, the stranger calmly offered to make a bet on which of them would be the first to destroy 100. At the time of the battle, the guy still managed to flirt with the girl, offering to drink together in the evening. The girl, fighting off the zombies, told the guy that he had every chance because he killed 10 attackers with one blow. And then one of the zombies took advantage of the guy's inattention and, attacking him from behind, sharply bit his neck. The brutal zombies attacked the stranger, crushing him with their pressure, and the girl said that she could handle it herself. Out of nowhere, those huge leeches appeared and began to penetrate the guy's body. But the stranger jumped up and continued killing zombies, asking the girl how many had already been killed. Kevin was at a safe distance at that time, and seeing the actions of his two partners, was amazed that almost nothing affected the guy. Tom came to his senses and continued to challenge the second intruder, who was in the school, to a fight. But he didn't need to be there to deal with Tom. The stranger, having scattered most of the zombie crowd, told the girl that he would deal with the second intruder, who was controlling the zombies. At that moment, Tom rushed into the crowd of angry zombies, hoping that his opponent was already there. The guy attacking the zombies saw Tom and said he wouldn't let him ruin all the fun. He instantly flew into the air and struck Tom with a powerful blow to the jaw. Kevin asked Juliana, who came up, why she involved him in all this. Because they could handle it themselves, to which the girl replied that the guy had a limit on his strength. The longer he fights, the more useless his strength becomes. It is quickly spent. The guy fighting with Tom noticed that there was not a scratch on him after the blow, which means he needs to deal with him quickly. Otherwise, everyone will be in great danger. Juliana looked at Kevin and said it was his time to fight. Tom dealt powerful blows to the guy one after another. The strength of the second weakened. With the last of his strength, the guy grabbed Tom's hand and bent it back. Tom winced in pain. The guy gathered all his strength into a fist to finish off Tom with one blow. At that moment, a huge leech flew through the air and headed for Tom's head. She overtook Tom at full speed and burst into his mouth, open in horror. Kevin and Juliana looked at Tom. It seemed that this scum gave him great strength. Tom's face turned black, and he exclaimed that he felt great, full of energy and ready for further battle. Tom caught the guy in flight and, holding him in his hand, began to slowly squeeze his body. He then pinned the boy to the ground and prepared to deliver an indestructible blow, mocking his helplessness. Juliana hurried Kevin. It was time to act. Tom's strength was growing and the guy was weakening. One of the defenders, attacking the zombie at that time, saw the guy's helplessness, rushed to his aid, and threw a bat at Tom. The weapon used was insignificant compared to Tom's size, but it helped buy some time. He grabbed the exhausted guy, threw him on his back, and started running, fleeing from Tom. At that moment, Tom's huge hand grabbed the defender's head and lifted him above the ground. An unpleasant click was heard. The head was flattened in an instant. The girl with a sharp blade instead of a hand told Kevin to at least deal with the zombies if he didn't want to fight the giant. Kevin replied that they could figure it out themselves, and the girl headed towards Tom. Tom at that moment was tearing and throwing everything that came to his hand. No one could stay alive. He suddenly noticed her. The girl was rapidly approaching Tom. She, using her sharp weapon, quickly inflicted deep cuts on Tom's leg. Tom just laughed in response because he doesn't feel anything. He's a zombie. And then Kevin looked at Tom's hand. The wounds remained and did not heal, which means he is beginning to lose his zombie abilities. To confirm his guesses, Kevin threw a stone fragment at Tom's head and it cut his cheek. The wound remained. Tom saw that Kevin did it and said that he was not sure that he was as strong as last time. Kevin replied that it was not he who became stronger. It was Tom who became weaker, and this was noticeable in his wounds. Kevin lifted dozens of stone shards into the air and threw them at Tom. Tom's whole body was covered with lacerations, and he fell to the ground. At that moment, the largest leech appeared, and this time it had jaws and sharp teeth. It rushed towards Kevin to take over his body. In one motion, Kevin tore the monster in half. Tom, who was lying on the ground, seemed to have no intention of fighting anymore. He told Kevin that the reason was that he considered him his savior. Kevin replied that Tom was mistaken. Kevin was never his savior, but on the contrary, he used him. He reminded Tom about that incident in the abandoned hospital and admitted that it was he who used Tom as a ghost to scare away people coming to the hospital. And when the walls of the hospital began to collapse, Kevin used Tom as a human shield. Then Kevin added that if it weren't for Juliana, everyone would already be dead. The guy, who was exhausted and weakened by the battle, extended his hand to Kevin and said that it was time to tell him who they were and what was going on around them. The guy began his story that neither the invaders nor Juliana are people. They are like mental spiritual bodies. Once upon a time, spirits created people and other creatures simply as toys. Kevin tried to interrupt the guy, saying that this is a well-known theory of the universe, and there is nothing unusual here. And then one said that people are like toys, like characters in any computer game. And the guy continued, saying that the earth serves the spirits as some kind of entertainment. All of this is managed by a heavenly committee, and Juliana is the manager of this committee. There are those who travel around the world using their bodies to experience the material world. They are called travelers. Juliana added that travelers are prohibited from killing, and those who break the rules and try to destroy everything are intruders. One of Juliana's clones said that the number of invaders is growing every day. They are becoming stronger, so they decided to team up with people who have superpower, and this is a special measure. The guy suggested that Kevin team up with them. We need to solve together a lot of problems that have arisen on Earth. Kevin was ready to refuse. He was not going to play children's games and pretend to be a superhero. And Juliana said that she should tell him what she promised. Juliana asked everyone to wait a little and took Kevin aside. She replied that if she told him, would Kevin agree to join them? To which he replied that he would decide only after he heard something worthwhile from Juliana. But in any case, he would be on his own. Juliana replied that the hypothesis about the time loop is just a guess, and there is someone suspicious. She added that perhaps it was the founder himself. He is not exactly God, but he has enough rights to return time. Kevin said that he wanted to meet him, and if necessary, he would fight God himself. Juliana replied that if he deals with all the intruders, then he will have such an opportunity. The phone rang in Dylan's room. It was his mother calling. He looked at the bandaged remains of his hands and asked the nurse to hand him the phone. But there was an alien male voice on the phone, which threatened Dylan that if he did not hurry up, he might lose his mother. It was already dark and the abandoned factory seemed to be completely empty. Dylan arrived on time. He saw Ricky with his friends and mom on her knees. He rushed to his mother screaming, but his friends stopped him. The leader said that he had the same request. Dylan should join them. But Dylan begged to let his mother go because he now has no arm and no longer has superpowers. Ricky replied he will check it now and hit Dylan's mother. And at that moment, the two guys flew off in different directions. Dylan repeated with a threat in his voice that the leader let his mother go. He exclaimed with delight that his superpower works perfectly without hands. The guys looked to where Dylan's mother had just been, but she was nowhere to be found, as if she had disappeared. And at that moment, everything around was lit up with a bright pink glow. Dylan was able to use his power, even without hands. Ricky was the first to rush to the exit, hoping for salvation. But Dylan's power overtook him and lifted him into the air in front of his amazed friends. The second one also tried to escape, but met the same fate. Both teenagers were hanging in the air and writhing in excruciating pain. The leader realized that he was in a hopeless situation and asked Dylan to talk. He extended his hand to him. The next moment, blood sprayed in all directions, and the leader's hand flew to the side. The guy held onto the rest of his hand and through his tears tried to say that if they had united, they would not have had problems with money. An ominous smile appeared on Dylan's face, and tears appeared in his eyes. It seemed that he had gone crazy. The red dome over the school disappeared. This meant one thing: traces of the intruder were destroyed. Juliana again reminded Kevin that if the intruder is not destroyed, then everything will turn into reality, and the cleared area will lead to another incident. Juliana added that she simply manipulates people's memories, turning them into natural disasters, and the more intruders, the more they need the help of people with superpowers. Kevin looked at Juliana and asked why she had so many cats at home. She replied that they used some of them to separate superpowers. Then she smiled and asked if he really liked cats. Dylan stood in the middle of the workshop of an abandoned factory, looked around and could not believe what had happened. Did he really kill them all? Dylan saw his mother lying nearby, apparently. He accidentally touched her when he was dealing with the bastards she was not breathing. He tried to use the revive power, but it didn't work. Dylan sobbed and blamed himself. He tried again and again to bring his mother to her senses, but it was useless. One of Juliana's clones stood on the second floor of an abandoned factory and carefully watched Dylan. She did not expect that it would go so far. The bully who chased Tom and Dylan in a car managed to survive the car accident. He was furious and thirsty for revenge. A shadow suddenly appeared behind him and said that he could help with this and give him superpower. Juliana's clone looked at the unhappy Dylan. She was appointed his manager and decided it was time to intervene. She stood on the edge and flew down towards the standing Dylan. The next moment, his body seemed to be pierced by something. The manager's clone filled Dylan with power and fell exhausted. Dylan, having come to his senses, felt that necessary and powerful energy and realized that now they could take control of time travel. He soared into the air and everything around was illuminated with pink light. At that moment, Juliana felt something. It was Dylan's energy. She closed her eyes and tried to remember recent events related to him. Juliana told Kevin that there was something wrong with Dylan. Besides, his manager was dead and it all had to be connected somehow. Suddenly, in the distance behind the houses, a glow appeared. It looked like an explosion or fire. There was no doubt that this was Dylan's doing. Two guys rushed to the entrance of some building and seemed to be afraid of not making it in time on the way they discussed where people got such abilities from. But at that moment, the slabs in front of them cracked and a huge concrete block rose from the ground, blocking their path. Dylan stood at the top and played with his strength. Passers-by began to scatter in different directions in horror. Juliana said that the manager who was responsible for Dylan's forces does not get in touch. They stood on the roof of a nearby building and could not understand whether it was Dylan or not. The second clone of Juliana, wearing glasses, said that if it was an intruder, then there would not be such a danger. Perhaps someone promoted him. And then one of the defenders could not stand it and rushed towards Dylan. He was always uncontrollable and tried to show his superiority. He almost approached Dylan and raised his sharp sword above his head, hoping to remain unnoticed. But at the same instant, his arms were immobilized and hung along his body. The weapon fell out of his hands. The girls sighed, saying that this was a very stupid act, because he could restore strength from sunlight, and it was almost an order. If he died now, he would die forever. Suddenly Dylan appeared. He hung above them in the air. The bandages from his half-arms fluttered in the wind. The bespectacled clone exclaimed how he could kill those he was supposed to protect, and Juliana asked how he was able to get into Dylan's body. He admitted that he betrayed them and all the memories that the manager controlled were lies. Juliana screamed that Dylan's super strength was not enough to attack. The manager in Dylan's body replied that he discovered his powers gradually so that they would not notice anything, and he was pleased with the result. Now, he is stronger than even Kevin. Then he added, as the founder said, they must punish all travelers and close their path, and if they do not want to die, then they should not twitch. The clone with glasses said that the founder could not prohibit travelers from moving. This is complete nonsense. The manager, who betrayed his friends, exclaimed that now he would make people believe it, and the sky lit up with a bright light. And at that moment, Kevin could not stand it. He tried to ward off Dylan's attack, in whose body the manager was. Dylan attacked Kevin again. The force emanating from his hands was no small one. Kevin collected rock shards into the air and threw them furiously at Dylan. He managed to stop the stones flying at him with the stump of his hand and laughed. Is this really all that Kevin is capable of? Kevin asked why the time loop didn't work when Dylan killed someone. Then he added, because if Dylan wanted to kill someone, he could do it with Kevin's hands. Dylan laughed and replied that Kevin should not flatter himself. His abilities are a secret project that even the top people don't know about. And then he shouted that it was time for Kevin to die and directed his energy towards Kevin. But before he had time to use it, he fell to his knees and felt that he could not move. Dylan still tried to use the power of his energy, but now it was safe for others. Juliana's clone threateningly ordered to answer who gives him orders. Otherwise, he will die. Dylan chuckled and said that because of the time loop, they wouldn't be able to kill him. The girl with the point in her hand exclaimed that she would continue to kill him until he told everything. At that moment, Dylan struck one of the assistants, but until that moment he could not move. Dylan, seeing the silent question in their eyes, replied that it was now in his power to control the level of containment. The wounded assistant said that they should attack Dylan all together at the same time, and maybe it would work. Instantly, the first blow struck from behind flew towards Dylan. The second blow was inflicted by a girl holding knives. And suddenly Dylan's eyes began to dim. He lost his orientation in space. The time loop triggered and there was a rebound. But something went wrong. No one could have expected it. Dylan should have died, but he began to rise. His strength did not even weaken, and he again used his energy. The defender rushed at him again to strike. Dylan also fought back and used his strength to attack. The second time, the sword of another defender fell on him. Dylan was able to hit back again. Everything said that Dylan was invincible. It seemed like the time loop had closed and everything was repeating itself over and over again. There was only one thing left for them to do to stay alive. They needed to flee. But one of the clones failed to escape and fell at the feet of the enraged Dylan. He threw the second one into the air, but Kevin managed to react and was now holding it in the air. Dylan saw this and laughed, saying that it looked like their roles had changed. The stones thrown by Kevin were again stopped by Dylan. The throws were useless. Kevin instantly decided to change tactics and used his power directly on Dylan on his body. Dylan was thrown by the energy wave against the wall of the opposite building. Kevin hung in the air and looked at the hole in the wall where Dylan's body had disappeared. Perhaps this was the end. Suddenly, Dylan flew out of the hole like a bullet and rushed at Kevin, getting closer and closer. Kevin threw his hand forward in hopes of stopping Dylan. Dylan was quickly approaching. He seemed to have more power than Kevin. Their eyes met. Kevin's strength was running out, but he pulled himself together and struck Dylan with all his might. The blow was so powerful that Dylan was thrown high into the sky. Kevin fell to the ground and felt a sharp pain in his arm. It was broken from the blow. Dylan stood over Kevin with a victorious look and taunted him that his telekinesis didn't work. Kevin decided that there was only one way to kill this bastard, and he had to try it. Dylan rushed in to deal Kevin the final killing blow. This time Kevin did not confront his opponent and allowed himself to be killed. And at that very moment, Dylan's mind began to dissolve in time. The time loop triggered and a rebound occurred. Kevin's last thoughts were that he could rewind time until the manager took possession of Dylan's body. The moment when Kevin was killed, further back. Here is the moment when he is still alive. Further, and further back. The moment when the red dome over the school had just disappeared, but there had not yet been an explosion in the distance. Kevin tried to catch the moment when the manager had not yet taken over Dylan's body. Kevin felt his energy running low and he knelt down and coughed up blood. Kevin was not strong enough to turn back time further, and he again saw Dylan, who already had a manager. Again this explosion, which claimed hundreds and thousands of lives. The wounded child fell at Kevin's feet and begged for help. An innocent boy died before his eyes. Kevin considered himself stupid, worthless, incapable of anything. He's a stupid jerk. He looked down and saw a child walking with a phone and headphones. He did not hear what was happening around. He was playing a game on the phone. And then an explosion threw him up and he began to fall to the ground. A little more and he would fall to his death. For a moment, Kevin thought that even now, before his death, he was thinking and trying to commit some stupid act that had nothing to do with himself. Kevin extended his limp hand upward. He managed to soften the blow and the boy remained alive. He closed his eyes and sank into unconsciousness. Suddenly he saw a bright light in the darkness and heard a voice that asked why he saved the child. Kevin replied that he didn't know. Probably before his death he wanted to do something good, and realized that he was talking to the Creator. The Creator asked what he would do if he had another chance. Kevin replied that there would be no stupid, thoughtless actions in his life, and the Creator said that he would turn back time and undo everything Kevin had done, but that might make life difficult for him. Kevin came to his senses. He was alive. Manager Delona watched with pleasure everything that was happening. Time returned to the moment when Dylan was in an abandoned factory and tried to save his mother. Dylan's manager turned and saw Kevin in front of her and asked in surprise how he got here. He should be at school. Kevin, with a sharp movement, pointed a sharp piece of glass at the manager's eye and began interrogating him. He asked what was the purpose of the one who stood above her and whose orders she carried out. The manager responded that the founder was keeping an eye on the board members, and she was ordered to keep it a secret from the administrators. Kevin asked what she was going to do with Dylan. She said his body was perfect, that no one would notice. Kevin pressed the bridge of his nose with a piece of shrapnel and asked where their headquarters was and received the exact address. He said harshly that he would grind everyone into dust. The manager exclaimed that she was very happy about this and offered to team up. Kevin said she just needed to die. He turned and looked at Dylan. The poor guy bent over his mother's body and tried to help her, but the force did not work. He stepped aside and sobbed. It was his fault. It was because of him that my mother died. And then he saw Kevin. Dylan decided that Kevin came to fight again and said that enough is enough. He no longer has that energy. He is tired. He lost his mother. He lost his hands. he is no one else. Kevin told him that it seems that he has not yet fully revealed his potential. He needs to try. Who knows? Maybe Dylan is stronger than him. Kevin looked into the sky. He knew that the creator was watching him and he would find a way to get rid of his control.